All right, welcome everyone, students. I see you've all attended class in this early morning today. Yes. Actually, should I just call you by your names?
Sure.
Yeah.
Richard?
Yes.
What do you want to say, Richard?
Am I a Padawan now?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a good first question, Richard. So we're here today to talk about the lore and overall story of Star Wars Legends from the very beginning to the very end. It'll be mostly in-universe, but we'll talk about maybe some fun facts and stuff along the way. And with that, the first thing that we need to hit are the different eras. And so if you have like a Star Wars book or novel, in the front of it, there'll be an actual little timeline thing showing all of the different books and where they fit. And these are the different eras that they kind of divide up into. As you can see, they are not evenly divided. This one's got like however many tens of thousands of years, and this one's got like 20 years. But that's the idea, is that we go from before the Republic, and then to the Old Republic era, and then Rise of the Empire is kind of the prequel era, then the Rebellion, the New Republic, the New Jedi Order, and finally the Legacy era, which does last a pretty decent while. Now you may be wondering, what do we do with Star Wars The Clone Wars? This 2008 cartoon started with a movie, and then there's all this other multimedia stuff. For this presentation, counter to what Wikipedia, the Star Wars fandom wiki, says, I'm going to be considering that part of the Disney canon timeline and not part of Legends. The reason being that the Clone Wars does retcon quite a bit of stuff, and also things that tie into the Clone Wars are almost all overwhelmingly in the Disney canon. Yes.
So is there no Ahsoka at all in the timeline you're going to talk about? Is she not even alive?
She's not going to be, because if you look, all the things that mention Ahsoka that aren't part of the Clone Wars, because she's like the main kind of poster child of this, and then like the biggest, most obvious, like what was she doing during the movies? Like this is all the stuff she shows in the Disney canon, and this is the stuff she shows in outside of the Clone Wars and Legends. So like you can very well see that the tendrils connecting to her are entirely on the Disney side. I mean, there's like a couple little like kids things, but I think the story of Legends works better without her, because as soon as Clone Wars got introduced, they started kind of overwriting and rearranging stuff. And since they were like within a couple years after that reset the timeline and had a whole new continuity, it makes sense that that fits in there. But you know, people will try to make it fit. If you read Wikipedia, it does like try to fit everything in, and kind of with the principle that if it came later, it overwrites the earlier stuff, but it's still a little bit awkward, and I think it works better. She'll be in the canon lecture, if all you big Ahsoka fans out there. But the canon lecture is not part of this series, it'll be in the next one or the one after that. Okay, so, technology in the Star Wars galaxy. You guys are probably familiar with the basics. You got your droids, you got your blasters. Blasters, by the way, are not laser weapons, they're plasma weapons. That's why they're able to dodge them and like reflect them with a lightsaber and stuff. There are laser weapons, but they're pretty rare, and for the most part, any like glowing thing you see shoot across the screen is a blaster. One exception, notably, would be the Death Star super laser. If it's a big long beam, also the SPHATs and Attack of the Clones, those big like thingies that shoot the big blue beam. Was that going to be your question?
Yeah, I was going to ask you what the hell that is.
It's a self-propelled heavy artillery, and I forget what the T stands for. Yes, Andrew.
So what makes blasters better than guns with bullets in them?
So
because
bullets,
I can't block a bullet.
That's
but
true.
If I was a Jedi, I guess I could block a blaster.
So bullets are much faster, obviously, and that's actually they're a pretty good, decent anti-Jedi weapon. Like a shotgun is actually one of the better things if you wanted to kill a Jedi. What makes a blaster better is that the gas cartridges that power this, like before you have to reload, is like 500 shots. Also, it delivers a lot more energy. So if you're dealing with anything that has like a personal energy shield on it, which are less common in the main like era of Star Wars, but in earlier times they were more common before the blasters just vastly outstripped them. Like blasters will get through energy shields a lot better than bullets will. Yes, Richard.
Would a vibroblade be able to deflect the bullets?
If it was a cortosis fiber blade, maybe. But like, I don't know. I feel like a regular, like a Verpine slug thrower, which they call regular gun slug throwers. Most of them would probably shatter on a vibroblade, and it would probably break the blade as well. So maybe you'd be able to block one. Yes. Sir.
What's a Vertopus vibroblade or whatever you just said?
Verpine are like an insectoid species, and they're one of the few that like specialize in making like regular sniper rifles in modern Star Wars. They have regular like guns, and sometimes like elite clone units will use them for various things. So they do exist. But for most people, like, if you need to defend yourself, like, you're probably not going up against a Jedi, and the difference in bullet velocity is big, but like someone's not going to be able to dodge a blaster shot at point blank range anyway, even though it's much, much slower than a bullet. Obviously, there's the hyperdrive, which is a very important piece of technology. It's the main faster than light travel in Star Wars. It puts you into another dimension where kind of the rules are different. You can shoot through that tube really, really fast and then come on out. There's all the plast type things and Dura type things, which I've put together here. So like Stormtrooper armor looks like plastic. It's actually plastoid or Duraplast. Plastic but stronger. Flimsy plast is paper. But I assume it's tougher than paper because it's got plastic in it. Durasteel is just steel but more durable, and Transparasteel is what we would call glass. So like the windshields that they look out of in their ships, those are all Transparasteel. Yes, Cliff?
Was Plastisteel something, or am I misremembering?
There's probably Plastisteel too.
Okay.
As you can tell, there's a lot of very similarly named things in this family. But if there's plast in there, that means it's somewhat plastic or some sort of metamaterial using plastic. And then Dura, it's a better version of the kind we have. There's a lot of different types of shield generators. Here we have a Droideka with a shield bubble. But the two ones that matter for ships, and to a lesser extent for people, are particle and ray shields. So particle shields will block stuff. So if you think of in Rogue One when the ships were crashing into the bubble, I know that's in the Disney canon, but if you've seen that movie, when the ships crash into the shield bubble around the planet, that's a particle shield. They skip off of it. And ray shields just block blasters and lasers and stuff. So most ships will have a shield generator that puts out a combination of the two to block against both types of things. Also, the Gungan shields in Episode 1, those are ray shields, but they're not particle shields. People made of particles can walk right through them, just like the battle droids can. And finally, there's the lightsaber, which very cool, the most iconic Star Wars weapon. Basically, there's a battery in there, and it goes through a couple different crystals that amplify with the force power, and it's contained within a magnetic field and fills up with plasma. Oh, sorry. Yes.
So, just to be clear, the use of the Force is absolutely required to wield a lightsaber.
It's not 100% required, but to do well with it, you pretty much have to, or have to train specifically with a lightsaber, because when you're using it, the magnetic fields give it a weird weight to it.
Mm.
So obviously, Han Solo, he's able to turn on a lightsaber and use it to cut open the Tauntaun. So it's not the Force is what makes the blade go. It's that energy cell that makes the blade go. But the crystals, to construct a lightsaber, you need the Force.
Mm.
The crystals are imbued with the Force. And actually, to put it together, you have to use the Force, because if they're slightly misaligned, it'll just explode when you try to turn it on. So I guess theoretically, a droid or something could make it, but you kind of have to get the vibes right when you're putting it together. And generally, the way it works in video games and mostly in the canon is that the main primary crystal is an Adegan crystal, or there's different types, but that kind of gives it the power, and then the more focusing crystal is what gives it its color. Jedi ones usually use natural crystals from the planet Ilum. Sith ones, the reason they're red is that they're a synthetic focusing crystal that gives it that color. There are naturally occurring red crystals, but for the most part, the Jedi have a monopoly on Ilum and all the natural crystal locations, so the Sith have figured out a way to sort of artificially grow their own crystals. Those, for whatever reason, are mostly red. Alright, in the prehistory era, obviously we start with the Big Bang. This is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, so it is technically in our universe, supposedly. It's just a long time ago and far away. About 13 million years BBY. And by the way, I should mention here, BBY is before the Battle of Yavin, which is this event here, when Luke Skywalker blew up the first Death Star in the original Star Wars movie. That red gas giant there is Yavin. If you remember, the Rebel base was on the forest, jungle moon of Yavin 4, which is the fourth moon around the planet Yavin. And then ABY is after the Battle of Yavin. So that's kind of our BC AD kind of thing. They don't use it in universe. They don't actually base their calendars on that, but that's for our benefit because that's the main Star Wars moment, I guess. So we can judge everything based on how soon before or after that happened. And so the galaxy first formed at 13 million years before. Yes?
What years do they use in the universe, or do they not tell time?
They do tell time. There's a couple different ones, but usually it goes based off of since the formation of the Republic or since the formation of the Empire. It tends to be based on galactic governments.
Okay.
There we go. the galaxy itself. Here we have a map of the Star Wars galaxy. It is 120,000 light years in diameter. Sometimes they just zip across this in a couple days or a week because hyperdrives have different speeds. But you can get pretty much where you need to go fairly fast. The unknown regions are this area. The reason they're unknown and the rest of it is so well explored is because there's kind of like a wall or barrier in hyperspace right here with only a few different ways through it, and it's pretty hard to navigate, and those ways are always kind of shifting. So like you can get into the unknown regions, but like you may not be able to get back, or you may just crash into something when you're going into hyperspace. So it's like very unexplored compared to the rest of it. Let's see. 90% of the stars are main sequence stars in the Star Wars galaxy, much like our own galaxy. It's divided into regions, so I don't know how well you can see this, but the deep core is this dark area here. And then as we go outward, there's the core worlds. The core worlds are like where Coruscant is. Then there's the colonies, the inner rim, the expansion region, the mid rim, then there's the outer rim, and then the unknown regions over here. It has 400 billion stars and 180 billion with planets, but I think most of those are probably not inhabited because of the way hyperspace works. I think we'll get to that once people invent hyperspace. So 200,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, there was a war happening on Coruscant, at that point called the planet Notron. There were two species vying for control, the Zhel, which are humans, and the Town, who later become the Mandalorians, as you can see by their heads being shaped kind of like the Mandalorian helmet with the classic T visor. The war lasted centuries and it nearly ended with a volcano exploded, but that wasn't the end of it. But that volcano did turn the tide of one particular battle, which made its way into a song, which continued existing all the way up until the Clone Wars era, where certain clones were taught a version of that song. Yes, Reed?
So, if the Mandalorians used to look like that, did the humans look different as well, or did they look like us already?
The humans already look like humans, because basically, as this species died out, they let other species into the Mandalorians. The Mandalorian became a culture more so than a species. Originally, they were this warrior species, but by the end, it was almost entirely humans who were Mandalorians.
Okay.
Yes, Richard?
Was the technology, I guess, sort of more, similar to the advancements that they had, after, I guess more of what we see usually in, the media and whatnot? Or was it still sort of, maybe more like our technology too?
I think this would have been more like our technology. I think they had probably regular non-vibro type blades. They would have had guns. They might have had very early blasters, but it was a lot more primitive than what we see in the main. Now, Star Wars is kind of known for having sort of a stagnant technology. Things will get better, but only very slowly and slightly. But this is still in the era where things were noticeably worse. And yeah, so the warrior culture of the Town lived on even after they became called the Mandalorians, and they were mostly other species like humans and Twi'leks and what have you. 100,000 years before the Battle of Yavin is when the Celestials were in charge. Not much is known about them, but they were sensitive to the Force, and they were very, very powerful. They were known as the Architects because they built certain things, like the Corellian star system, where Han Solo is from, is actually artificially put together. The Maw, which is a dense region of black holes where the planet Kessel is. That's actually why the Kessel Run is a feat, is because of all those black holes. And so, they were doing stuff, they were making weird things, and they were in charge. Not a whole lot is known about them. They eventually just sort of disappeared from the galaxy. One of their members, Abeloth, remained imprisoned in the black holes of the Maw for a long time, came up later. And in the Clone Wars cartoon, these guys were eventually retconned into being Celestials, the guys from the Mortis arc. And it's kind of unclear how exactly that's supposed to work, or how anyone would know that, because if you remember that episode, by the end of it, when Anakin and Obi-Wan and all them leave, they completely forget what happened. So I don't know how anyone actually would know that. But in some of the later books, they kind of tied it into this, and their missing mom is the creature Abeloth, who becomes this horrible sort of Lovecraft monster. In any case, whether they are or not, the Celestials would have been kind of like these guys. Oh, and this thing is called Centerpoint Station, which basically uses tractor beams, and that's what was allowed to... That's how they made the Corellian star system, is by moving stars and planets in with that thing. So yeah, the Maw. Like I said, it is a big nebula full of black holes. The planet Kessel is another sort of artificial creation of the Celestials. And when Han Solo made the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs, or however many it was, had to do with his hyperdrive was really good. He was able to skirt closer to the black holes. That is a picture of Abeloth. Not a very good picture, but it is a picture. That's the main one you'll see if you look on Wikipedia. And this place also, because of its seclusion and its difficulty to navigate, secret Imperial projects were done here. Not only on Centerpoint Station, which they found, but also the Death Star prototypes were built in the Maw. 36,453 BBY in the before the Republic era. These things, which to my knowledge are never actually explained as to what they are or where they came from, appeared on a bunch of different worlds and let Force sensitives onto them, and then they teleported them to Tython in the Deep Core, which is the homeworld of the Jedi, and it's right there. And the beginning of the Jedi was called the Jedi Order. On the planet Tython, there were 2 companion moons, Ashla and Dogan. And so these original people who knew the Force, like, they didn't have a whole lot figured out, so they were just sort of meditating, and they realized there was kind of a lighter aspect and a darker aspect. And they tried to maintain a balance, which worked as long as they were secluded. And so, like, if you were going too dark, you'd get sent off to the Bogan moon. If you were getting too light, you'd be sent to the Ashla moon. They did notice, however, that people veering to the dark was, like, a much more common occurrence than people veering to the dark. And that later came back to bite them. Also, like, as soon as other people start showing up, this whole balance thing doesn't work so well when they're not completely isolated from the galaxy. 35,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Rakatan Infinite Empire has a war probably with the Celestials, and the Celestials are gone after this point. And the Rakatans, who look like this, end up taking over most of the known galaxy. They enslave lots of species. Other species they create as slave races or sort of breed them in a certain way. They control a lot of planets. Like, their technology is the reason that Kashyyyk, the Wookiee homeworld, has all those big trees. They did a lot of stuff, but their biggest, most important for plot reasons later invention is the Star Forge, which is this thing here. So it orbits the planet, or orbits the star in the Lihan system, also known as Rakata Prime, and it can suck up material from the star and use the dark side to basically print out a bunch of ships and droids and what have you. And that was kind of like their main way of maintaining this vast empire, is they have this place that it's like a factory that can just do whatever and make as much stuff as they want. In the year 27,700 before the Battle of Yavin, the planet Korriban, which is the homeworld of the Sith species, who we will talk about later, but these are the red Sith with the thingies on their cheeks, they're attacked by the Rakata. The Sith are able to repel the attack, however, but the planet is devastated, turning it into the desert tomb world that we all know and love. And the Sith move to Ziost, which is a much more habitable place, and they keep this as kind of a sacred tomb world, like the place that we later know as the Valley of the Dark Lords, which you go to in the Knights of the Old Republic games. 220 years later, humans begin colonizing the core worlds. Humans probably arose somewhere. Well, we know they were on Coruscant. We don't know for sure if that's their homeworld, but they start branching out to other ones. But they're not using hyperdrives at this point. They're using sleeper ships. So, like, people go into stasis and, like, ice. You know, you see this in, like, Avatar and stuff. And their ships arrive there the slow way because they don't have faster than light yet. And they wake up when they get there. I don't know how exactly this exact date is known, but if you look it up, like, these events are very specific. It's not like circa this year. It's 25,793 BBY. The Rakatan Empire invades Tython, which you remember is where the Jedi Order is, and they're repelled. At this point, they use Force Sabers, which is kind of, I don't know, it seems like a cop-out, but basically they're lightsabers powered by the Force. Later on, we'll see that the first true lightsabers are called Proto-Sabers, and they have, like, a battery that you wear in your waist to power them. But anyway, somehow they have, like, modern lightsabers at this point. But also, if you look at artwork, you'll see that they have katanas that just have the Force in them and glow. So I'm not totally sure what the deal is with that. Anyways, a human named Dagan Locke, he goes mad and falls to the dark side after, like, seeing these Rakatans who are very good at the dark side. And we have the first sort of split between the light and the dark factions. The Darksiders are all expelled or killed, and the light side Jedi Order was established. They realized that, like, hey, actually, these Rakatans and all their, like, evil creations, and the dark side is not very good at all. Why would we want to be a balance between really nice kindness and genocidal mania? Why would you want to be halfway between those two? Just pick the nice one. And that was kind of their theory ever since. 25,150 BBY is the decline and fall of the Rakatan Empire. Somehow, their connection to the Force started going away and they couldn't use their own technology, and they also got hit by this virus. Later, people theorized that maybe one of the slave races, like humans, actually engineered this virus to get themselves freedom. So there were slave revolts all over the galaxy. The Tion cluster was destroyed, and eventually the Hutts moved in there. And once the Rakatans were gone, and all their technology is still around, humans and other species were able to reverse engineer their hyperdrive, which really set off a big thing of exploration, because now we can use hyperspace. And because of all this connection and being able to zip around really fast, this is when the Galactic Republic is first formed. And this number of this 25,000 comes from A New Hope, actually, when Obi-Wan Kenobi says to Luke that for over 1,000 generations, the Jedi have protected the Republic. Well, a generation is about 25 years, so there's 1,000 of them. That's how they came up with that number. I guess he was not exaggerating. That was just what it was. And so, because the Republic has started at this very distant date, you'll have like chunks of thousands of years where not much happens, because like instead of putting the Republic was started, I don't know, 6,000 years or 7,000 or even 10, they've got all this space, and like a lot of the writers just didn't cover up very much of it because there's just too much time. Hyperspace. It is not like Star Trek where you can just kind of go wherever you please. The fabric of this other dimension, hyperspace, is contorted by gravity. So like planets and stars moving around is always sort of changing it. And as a result, there's specific lanes or routes or tubes that are like well-known and established and safe. And then everything outside of that is kind of iffy. So because of that, there's main trade lanes that go through the galaxy. And if you want to go off on your own, maybe you have the Force, or maybe you make smaller jumps. Astromech droids like R2-D2 are there to like kind of calculate how things have changed, but it's not 100% sure. And also because of that, that's why there's like a few inhabited planets and that are very important. You always feel like whenever there's a galactic war, I'll get to your question. Whenever there's a galactic war, it seems like there's only a few planets that really matter. Like there's all these trillions of stars, and like even in the Clone Wars cartoon, it's like, oh, they're fighting here and then here, and like this planet matters everything. Why can't they just go around? Well, the reason they can't go around is because it's in the middle of a hyperspace lane, and there's technology that can pull ships out of hyperspace. So these are like, each planet along the way is kind of like a fortress, where like you have to take that planet to be able to access everything behind it. Yes, Reed.
So for these hyperspace lanes, are these like really wide, or can two ships going in hyperspace in opposite directions on the lane crash into each other?
Collisions do happen, but they're very rare. I think these ones are like pretty big. Like maybe they're like a light year in diameter or something.
So you don't need like a space traffic controller to make sure that these spaceships aren't crashing each other?
You probably would want a space traffic controller, but as far as I know, nobody, even the Galactic Empire, had the resources to like police and check all that out. So like, yeah, there would be an occasional crash, or like maybe like a planet or an asteroid moves and that like shifts how hyperspace is, and now you get squished into something. Han Solo was worried about crashing into a star or a black hole, which it seems like it'd be easy to miss, but the mass shadow, which is what they call it, generated by those heavy objects is much bigger in hyperspace, as far as I can tell. Did you have a question?
I was just thinking, like, I thought I remember something about the ships themselves, like the hyperdrive cores having like a safety system in place that keeps that kind of thing from happening.
Yeah, so there is a safety system inside of the hyperdrive where if it detects a mass shadow coming up, it'll forcibly revert you into real space. That can be overridden, and there's also technologies like interdiction chips, which it's a little inconsistent whether or not the interdiction just tricks the safety system or if it actually rips your ship out of hyperspace manually. But either way, there are ways to, like, you can't just go past. And even like a big planet star system, probably you would have to come out of hyperspace there, manually get your ship around to the next area, and then take off. And that is, again, why like battles are centered on planets and not just people blitzing the core. Later on in Episode 3, like when there's that big attack on Coruscant at the beginning, where Palpatine was taken hostage, that is actually capable, and that's actually possible because they found a secret hyperspace lane that goes to Coruscant from like over here somewhere. And that was how General Grievous was able to sneak in, because like these areas were actually pretty well defended at that point. And of course that secret lane was leaked to them by Darth Sidious. Now, what do we mean when we say the Old Republic? Different people mean different things when they say it. The Galactic Republic is one continuous entity from this 25,000 BBY all the way up through the Clone Wars and the start of the Empire. In A New Hope, Grand Moff Tarkin says that the last remnants of the Old Republic have been swept away. And so he's clearly talking about that whole thing. However, there are also times when people will talk about the difference between like the Republic and the Old Republic. And that is because 1,000 years before the movies, there was a big change in the government. It wasn't like a total change, but they like drafted up a new constitution. They changed how the Supreme Chancellorship worked. They made Jedi more involved. They demilitarized a lot of things. That was called the Ruusan Reformation. And because of that kind of point there, from 1,000 BBY to the movies is, if people are just talking, they'll call that the Republic. And before that, they'll call the Old Republic, especially talking about the Old Republic era around 5,000 BBY. But if you're beyond either of those, if you're living in the Empire or the New Republic, you might just call that whole old thing the Old Republic. 24,000 BBY, the Jedi Order relocates to Ossus to avoid Republic influence on Tython, because remember, Tython is in the Deep Core, and the Republic is exploring that area. A student named Zendor studies the dark side, and that doesn't go so well, and it starts the first great schism in the Jedi Order. The Darksiders are exterminated, but his girlfriend, Arden Lyn, ends up going into stasis, and she is a master of Teras Kasi, which is a kind of sort of jujitsu martial arts, and she was actually invented for that game, the Masters of Teras Kasi, which came out on like the PS1 or something. I don't know the specifics, but much, much later in the future, she's woken up, and this is where she came from. I don't know why they made her be so far in the past. All right, now that the Jedi are here, we can talk about the Jedi Code. There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. It embodies the Jedi ideal of being serene, not necessarily deafened to emotions, but you're not letting them control you. And of course, being nice and not evil. The Sith Code, peace is a lie, there's only passion, so they're fueled by their emotions and often driven by them to the point where they have not as much agency. Through passion I gain strength, through strength I gain power, through power I gain victory, and through victory my chains are broken, the Force shall free me. So this idea of, if you're a Jedi, you kind of submit to the will of the Force and you work with it. If you're a Sith, you're dominating your own will upon the Force. And in fact, I'll get to that, but there's this whole idea that in the actual original Star Wars movies, they never mention the light side or the light side of the Force. They just call it the Force, and there's the dark side, which gets at this idea from George Lucas that the Force in its natural state is light, and it is balance or rigid. It's like balance on its own, and then the dark side is like a cancer or like corruption within the Force, and the dark side is unbalance. Different people will take this different ways, and if you want to have a morality system in a video game particularly, it makes more sense to kind of have it as a slider, where balance is in the middle, and then you can go light or go dark. But that's the majority of the expanded universe stuff kind of treats it that first way, which is why this whole idea of the gray Jedi is really stupid. This one picture shows up all the time if you Google it, and a lot of people on like YouTube comments and stuff think it's like the coolest one because they're like, oh, they're between, they can use the light side and the dark side. But really, again, it's like I said before, it's stupid because it's like you're halfway between being really good and virtuous and extremely evil. So that just like, why are you compromising it halfway through? And the term gray Jedi does exist in Star Wars, but it was first used to apply to the Jedi Qui-Gon Jinn, who was not even remotely a dark side. He was called a gray Jedi because he didn't always listen to what the Council said. But he was still firmly on the light side of the Force. So this is a total misnomer. Okay, 22,800 before the Battle of Yavin, the planet Ilum is discovered. It's an ice world, and it's where they get their lightsaber crystals. And it is in the unknown regions. In the Disney canon side of things, this is eventually the planet that becomes Starkiller Base. But in Legends, that never happened. It has always been an ice world with lightsaber crystals. 19,000 BBY, Kamino undergoes rapid, sudden climate change, and their planet floods. So they have to like build these thingies to survive on it. And this is also where they invented all their cloning and got really good at it because they had a population disaster. Between 17,000 and 15,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, there's a bunch of conflicts between Coruscant and Ulsakan. There's like 10 or 12 of these wars. Not very important, but it is there. The Hutts. They live in this area, and they've been a thorn in the side of every galactic government. They have slavery, their own rules, and like their laws kind of suck. Nobody can really control them because they own all the bounty hunters. And as far as I know, nobody has ever been able to take care of the Hutts. Even the Pius Dea era, which was, for some reason, I can only assume Warhammer fans came up with this, because for like 1,000 years, Star Wars turned into 40K. Because like human supremacists in the core built these ships that look like cathedrals, kind of, and basically went out to exterminate all the aliens, which is very much a Warhammer type of thing. They did try to wipe out the Hutts, which it would have been nice if they did, but they failed at that. They stopped long before that. But the main outcome of this, which only lasts for 1,000 years, is that it kind of sets the stage for humans and aliens not always getting along. So in the core, especially on Coruscant, there's always kind of this like humans are better kind of idea that gets really emphasized in the Galactic Empire, and the aliens have always kind of felt like we're treated as second-class citizens, we live in the Outer Rim, all that kind of thing. The Jedi, however, are able to deal with this. 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin is the Second Great Schism, and this is actually like the main start of what we now know as the Sith Lords. It's also called the 100-Year Darkness. Certain Dark Jedi were creating dark side monsters, like this guy with his talisman. This is Karnus Moor. He has the Moor talisman. This is the thing that creates rat ghouls. This guy, Agent Paul, is this is his ghost actually, but he is like the first true Sith Lord because basically these guys are called Dark Jedi at this point. They're Jedi who have fallen to the dark side. They get banished instead of killed during this conflict, which is a mistake, because they run off into the galaxy and they find the planet Korriban and Zios where the Sith are hanging out, and they're like, "Well, we are your masters now. We are the Lords of the Sith," and that's where that kind of comes from. So there they are, becoming the first Sith Lords. Okay, we already talked about this. So, like, what does it mean to say someone is a Sith? You've obviously got the Sith species. Many of them are dark-sided, and they're kind of belligerent by nature, but they don't have to be. You've got the sort of lineage leading up to Darth Bane of people who called themselves Sith Lords. You've got Dark Jedi, who turned to the dark side but never gave themselves a Darth name and never called themselves a Sith. And you've got people trained by the Sith to use, like, Sith techniques, but are never called Sith either. So, like, this is what, like, Asajj Ventress here would be considered a Dark Acolyte. To be a Sith Lord is a claim to supremacy, even in the eras when there were many of them running around. It's like saying, I am a master of the dark side. Versus if you just train somebody to be your assassin, and they're using the dark side and they have a red lightsaber, they might just be your acolyte or an assassin, or they may even be part of your Sith army, because at certain points when the Sith were controlling armies, even the regular non-force sensitive troopers were called Sith because they worked for the Sith. So it gets a little confusing. But the kind of dividing line stick is, the measuring stick is, if somebody calls themselves Darth something, they're considered a Sith Lord. And in fact, the word Darth has a lot of different possible etymologies, but the most likely one is just shortened from Dark Lord of the Sith. Darth. And that's where that comes from. Alright, the Moor Talisman, this guy. He has this thing. He's able to transfer his essence or consciousness into it. It's very evil, and he can make and control Rakghouls with it. He ends up living in it long after he dies, and it'll, like, these things will, like, grab onto the neck and possess the person who's wearing it. The last person who had it ends up crashed in the Terrace Undercity on the planet Terrace, which is what causes the Rakghoul infection. Yes, Reed?
Can you talk more about Rakghouls? Because I haven't played KOTOR in a really long time.
So they're like little creatures. They go around. I may have a picture of them somewhere. No? Okay. Anyways, they're like little slimy things. They're like, people can turn into them, or getting bitten will turn you into one, but I think they can also just exist on their own. And they're not quite zombies, but they're kind of like zombies. They got sharp teeth and they'll give you like poison status effect if they bite you. Yes, Richard.
Isn't there like a serum in Knights of the Old Republic that like helps people who get like bitten or
there is a side quest that allows you to figure out a serum to counteract it. So even though it is kind of powered by the dark side, regular medicine can just kind of deal with it. However, if you may remember, the planet Terrace is bombarded and basically like the surface and Undercity are exploded shortly after that. So the serum is lost along with anyone that you would have saved using it. Yes, sir.
Were there Rakghouls in other places, or did that also exterminate Rakghouls?
No, there was Rakghouls in other places. It was never as bad as it was in the Terrace Undercity, because normally they're controlled by whoever's wearing the talisman, which is really just the mind of this guy controlling the person who's wearing the talisman to control the Rakghouls. But at that point in Knights of the Old Republic, this thing was just kind of operating on its own and like sending out Rakghoul vibes everywhere. Usually it's not that bad. Usually it's attached to a person who has command of them. And they generally don't want it to overrun a whole place. They just want to kill a couple people with it. 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. This is where we're kind of starting to get into what we would call the Old Republic era now. This particular Sith Lord, Marka Ragnos, who is best known as a ghost because he comes back as a ghost at several other points, is like, alright, the next leader of the Sith species here on Korriban needs to be one of you two. You two need to fight. And those two people are Ludo Kresh and Naga Sadow. Eventually Naga Sadow wins, and he starts the Great Hyperspace War, where he invades the Republic. Basically, how does he find out about the Republic since he was in Korriban? Well, a couple of explorers showed up. They were actually on the run from the law, but they were like, we're explorers from the Republic, and we want to bargain with you because we're ambassadors. And, well, they basically found out where they came from and attacked. Didn't work so well for those people. Along this point, during the Great Hyperspace War, one of Naga Sadow's ships that was transporting some kind of crystals or whatever gets lost in hyperspace and crashes on a planet where the people, both humans and red-blooded Sith species who were serving them, become the lost tribe of the Sith. They survive on that planet for many, many, many years, completely isolated from the galaxy because they don't have a hyperdrive. The one ship they came in on has like crashed and exploded, so they're just kind of living off the land at that point. Naga Sadow near the end of the war, he realizes he's losing and basically sneaks away to escape. He goes to Yavin 4, where, if you remember, the rebel base was. These big temple things were actually made by his servants, the Masasi. That's why they're called Masasi temples. So yeah, the rebel base was actually hidden in like a dark side nexus. Yes.
Are you telling me the rebel base was made by slave labor?
Yeah. A long time ago. They probably didn't know. But yeah, a bunch of Masasi, which are the red Sith that are like more big and bulky and they're not as smart. They were the ones who made that. And this guy put himself in suspended animation to hide out, no matter how long it takes. 4,400 BBY. A Jedi named Freedon Nad falls to the dark side and finds Naga Sadow there. He actually kills him after he wakes him up, but after learning some of his like dark side secrets, and he takes over the planet of Onderon and its companion moon of Duxon, which are places you visit in Knights of the Old Republic 2. He ends up died and buried directly under the royal palace in the city of Iziz on Onderon. So like his dark juices are like right there, corrupting the monarchy, which is bad. It leads to what's called the Freedon Nad uprising, where the queen, even though she's not super force sensitive, she has a little bit of it and turns to the dark side. It gets involved in this war between the Beast Riders, which are people that kind of ride on like flying creatures and are attacking and stuff. It's a whole complicated era. There's a whole comic series about this. But basically, even after Freedon Nad is dead, his spirit appears to a Jedi Knight named Ulic Qel-Droma, and his spirit is eventually killed by Exar Kun. But Ulic Qel-Droma falls to the dark side and sets off this whole other era. Yes?
How do you kill a spirit?
You just do. Something about these like older comics is like all the Sith Lords always come back as ghosts, and like sometimes they'll come back way, way later. But yeah, like having to deal with a Sith ghost is like a main thing. Yes.
Maybe I'm misremembering because it's been a bit since I played KOTOR, but so Force Ghosts, that's something that's not isolated to Jedi then. I assume that it's holocrons that Sith mostly exercise their will through usually.
So like a Jedi, when they become one with the Force, if they know the right techniques or whatever, they can manifest as a ghost, like anywhere. With the Sith have to do it, it'll either be like a holocron normally just has a hologram of the Sith, like an AI teaching. But sometimes the Sith can put their spirit into an object or into a place. And so they can exist as a ghost, but only there and in a limited fashion.
Gotcha.
And that's usually the case with these guys. They're usually haunting their own tombs. Exar Kun, in fact, later ends up becoming a ghost that Luke has to deal with all the way later. But anyways, yeah, this guy keeps causing trouble even as a ghost. In 4100 BBY, Bacta is introduced. It slowly becomes more popular than Kolto, which is the other next best thing. Basically, it is a type of bacteria that you put in water or whatever, or fluid, and it can heal a lot of stuff. It's like your health pack stuff is always Bacta. And Manan, which is an ocean planet, produced the Kolto, and that comes up later in Knights of the Old Republic, which we are slowly getting to. In the year 4030 BBY, Arca Jeth, a Jedi, and his friends defeat some space pirates who had Hapes as their base of operations. Because the women stayed home during this conflict to take care of the babies and most of the space pirates were killed, the Hapes later became a matriarchal society, which shows up later in like the New Republic era as kind of these isolationist queen, like it's ruled by a queen and like the Empire never took them over because they're just in this little nebula by themselves, but they end up becoming a bigger player in galactic politics later. Let's see. So here we have the spirit, I think, of Freedon Nad looking at Ulic Qel-Droma and Exar Kun and being like, you guys are going to be the next Sith people. You guys are going to wage war against the Republic. Yes.
When did these people start having more normal names like Luke?
Probably around the time the video games start happening. I feel like the comic people really like having weird names for them. Exar Kun is funny though because you can pretend he's like an anime girl. So we already talked a little bit about the Freedon Nad uprising. That's where the Queen fell to the dark side. This is another like whole big long comic series, but Ulic Qel-Droma and Exar Kun become best buds. Ulic becomes the Sith apprentice to Exar Kun, who's the inventor of the double-bladed lightsaber. Even though he turns evil, he keeps using blue the whole time, which gives him a cool look. And they wage war against the Mandalorian Crusaders, led by Mandalore the Indomitable. They end up taking over Yavin 4 again, so it keeps being a dark side evil planet, and they ruin Ossus, which was where the Jedi home place at this point. This ruining of Ossus here is why the Jedi moved to Coruscant, and the Jedi Temple is there. And also, like, during these wars, the Jedi and the Republic have become more friendly and on better terms. Nomi Sunrider, which is her, later becomes Grand Master of the Jedi, but she's the one who makes Uli Qel-Droma turn back to the light side. She actually severs his connection to the Force during a moment when he's, like, sad because he just killed his brother in a fit of rage. And he, being now a good guy, is able to lead the Jedi to Exar Kun, who's hiding out on Yavin 4. Because, he was his apprentice. So here we have Exar Kun, and here he is fighting some other Jedi. And in the year 3996 BBY, the Jedi are coming in, and he realizes he's not going to beat them, so he does this ritual to turn himself into a Force ghost hidden inside his own, like, sealed tomb chamber. And he will come back later to cause trouble for Luke in his Jedi Academy. But the Jedi think he's gone. This is a Terran Tatek, which is a kind of beast created by the Sith as, like, monsters to serve them at some point. Now that Exar Kun is done, he was like a great Sith sorcerer, by the way. That's why he knows all these rituals. He made a bunch of these things. So, like, during this time of peace, the Jedi are going throughout the universe hunting these things down. And a few of them end up surviving on Korriban. You kill this one in Knights of the Old Republic 2, I think.
That was going to be my question.
Okay.
Where that
Yeah.
screenshot's from?
It's either 1 or 2, because you go to Korriban in both games. And, like, yeah, there's a few of these surviving and hiding out. There might be one on Kashyyyk as well.
Is all that lore explained in KOTOR, where those came from, and, like, the sorcerer Sith guy?
A little bit. Like, it'll be in, like, item descriptions. I think Nomi Sunrider, I think you can find her robe, and it'll say, like, Nomi Sunrider's robe, she did this and this. But most of the lore comes from the comic books.
Okay.
And the games just tried to tie it in a little bit. I don't think they had rights to everything, so they weren't able to use all of the names. Now we get into an era that may be a little more familiar. This is, like, right up to Knights of the Republic. This is the Mandalorian Wars. In the year 3976 BBY, the Sith approach Mandalore the Ultimate and are like, hey, you guys should take over the Republic. And they do. So the Mandalorians change their armor a little bit. They're called the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders. You'll see these guys all over Knights of the Republic 1, and that is what men should be wearing. The Jedi Council, at this point, pretty much does nothing. They don't want to get involved in another war because there've just been like 3 of them back to back. Yes, Richard?
Is the Jedi Council on Dantooine in this one yet, or is it still just in I forgot what the other place was?
Yeah, I think this is the one on Telos. Like, they have different temples around the world, but like there is one on Dantooine. They have a Jedi temple there. I think they move back and forth. But during the Mandalorian Wars, they're like, we don't want to do anything. Even though things are getting worse and worse, and the Mandalorians are starting to invade into the Republic, a lot of the Republic senators and stuff are like trying to ask the Jedi to help, and the Jedi are just staunchly refusing to, which makes some Jedi upset about this. They want to help their people. And 2 of them, the Jedi that want to do this, are an unnamed Jedi, who later goes by the name Revan, and his best pal, Alec, which is actually short for a really long name.
So the normal names start right here.
I guess so, yeah. Alec is a lot like Alex, but it's like, I forget his whole... It isn't a normal name, but he goes by Alec, which is a normal name. In between here, like during the Mandalorian Wars, during the Knights of the Old Republic comics, which aren't about Revan and Malak, but about this guy, named... I forget his name. He's just a little boy. The Mor Talisman comes back and possesses this lady who is... she'll come back in part 2, so I don't need to remember her name now. But basically, they realize she's evil, she gets a little bit of control over it, so they seal her into this thing, which is like a Sith tomb thingy, and puts her into suspended animation for a long time. Basically, they were going to transport her to the Jedi Council, I think, so they could fix her, but it gets lost along the way. This crashes on a planet somewhere, and she'll wake up a lot later. Yes?
I just wanted to double check. Those were rat ghouls with like armor and guns, right?
I think, yeah, those are rat ghouls that she's
Holy
commanding.
crap.
Yeah, so when someone's directly in control of it, especially someone who has the Force, and that allows Karness Moore to like really control them, this is like kind of what rat ghouls are supposed to be, instead of just like these mindless creatures, which is what they were doing when the Talisman was acting without a person really commanding it. And I think her name is Celeste Morn. And I still can't remember his name. He's in the comics, like, that guy's name is Griff, I remember that. Anyways, they have their own little adventures, and they, like, meet Alec before he becomes Darth Malak and stuff. But, like, they're kind of doing their own thing. Yeah.
Did Darth Malak, does his name just come from putting an M in front of Alec?
Yeah, he went by Alec, and then he went to the dark side, he's like, I'm actually Darth Malak. So, these 2 Jedi and some of their buddies... Yes?
Was Revan just Evan?
No.
Ah.
Revan comes... We'll actually get to that on the slide.
Okay.
So these two Jedi, they end up going to the planet Cathar, which is where the like cat people are from. And they're like, they knew that this planet had been deserted for a while, and they weren't sure exactly what happened. They thought maybe there was a disease. But he picks up this Mandalorian helmet that he finds there and has a Force vision of what actually happened, which was that the Mandalorians just like genocided them and like blew them all up for no good reason. And he was very upset by that. And the Mandalorian who was wearing that helmet was trying to stop them and got killed alongside them. So Revan, which is what he calls himself now, leading the Revanchists, which is like a word means like remnant or like a vengeful spirit kind of thing. He picks that up and uses that as his iconic mask ever since, sort of out of memory of this Mandalorian who tried to prevent this disaster. And so on this point, like him and all the other Jedi here, and probably several others back from the core, they realize what's going on and they involve themselves in the war, despite the Council keep telling them not to. So now we're getting really into the video game. Along the way, during this war campaign, which Revan does like exceedingly well at, he becomes Supreme Commander of the Republic Forces after like a year. Him and his buddy Alec are hanging out on Dantooine, probably talking to that little Yoda guy, Master Rook or whatever. And they find these weird things, and everyone thinks it's a burial mound, but they get inside and like get past the computer system, and they realize this is actually a map of some sort created by the ancient Rakatan species. And this is leading them to the Star Forge, just one of several, and they're like, oh, this thing. And slowly, it gets this idea in their heads that maybe they can be evil and cool and powerful. Also, along the way, they find the planet Malachor 5, which is later where the Mandalorian Wars will end, but at this point, they're just kind of using it as a base of operations. And Revan comes across this area, which is a Sith Academy called Treyas Academy, made all the way back when the Sith were still, like, red-skinned and stuff. And like when they were that species. And this is made, they realize later, by remnants from like early on in like the Great Hyperspace War and stuff. The surviving Sith that were like exiled, like they were here and they still exist out there somewhere. And this gets Revan thinking and a little bit worried because like these guys are out there and they're going to invade at some point, which is bad. This is a cartoon rendering of Revan and the Jedi Exile, who in later was given the name Mitra Surik, on the Battle of Duxon, which is one of the more bloody campaigns in the Mandalorian Wars, where she had to like order a bunch of her people to just charge through a minefield and blow themselves up so that the rest of them could get through. So as you can see, Revan is becoming more and more dark-sided and using more nefarious and kind of bad tactics to try and win.
Did you draw that?
No, I did not draw that. I found this. There's actually a surprisingly good selection of these types of memes with their faces. So this leads up to the climax of the Mandalorian Wars in 3960 BBY, the Battle of Malachor 5. Basically, the Mandalorians have been pushed to the edge, to the brink, and they basically bait them into this final battle around the planet Malachor. This guy, Bayo Dur, and the Jedi Exile have worked on a super weapon called the Mass Shadow Generator. It's never clear exactly how it's made, but based on the name, it has something to do with the mass shadows that exist in hyperspace. And basically, they bait the Mandalorian fleet in, and they turn that thing on, and it just sort of crushes all of them. A lot of Jedi and a lot of Mandalorians died right away there, and all of Revan's most loyal supporters were outside of the range of the blast. So he kind of got rid of his detractors at the same time. Also, if you're a Jedi connected to the Force and you can sense that, all those people dying at once in close proximity in horrible ways will turn you to the dark side, which is exactly what happened. Almost all of the remaining Jedi under Revan's command have turned to the dark side by this point, including a guy who later becomes known as Darth Nihilus, except for the Jedi Exile. The Jedi Exile, Mitra Surik, when faced with this like overwhelming cacophony of sounds of the Force, actually blinds herself to it. She cuts herself off from the Force rather than just simply die or turn to the dark side, which is a very unique thing. This is HK-47. Around this point is when Revan built this droid because he realized with the Mandalorian Wars over, he needs to be a little more subtle and less destructive, so assassinate people who don't like him instead of just like blowing up entire planets. And here's a flashback picture of the Jedi Exile who returned to Coruscant and was like, hey, I know you told all of us to come back here and like fess up for our crimes. I'm the only one who's going to do so. And they were just like, well, you suck anyway. So she leaves the Jedi Order and sticks her lightsaber in that pillar and leaves, very upset by the fact that these guys who stayed home and did nothing would still pass judgment on her, who had to make all these hard choices.
So, when you say she stuck her lightsaber in that pillar, would she let go of it? Wouldn't it just turn off and fall?
Yes. So in this cutscene in Knights of the Old Republic 2, she like goes like this, and then like when she lets go, you can't see the blade, and it cuts away quick to somebody else. So you don't have to really think about what would have, because it probably would have slid through. I doubt that this is like a blast door or something that would resist a lightsaber blade. Maybe she turned it off, but it was like a dramatic moment because they're like, you have to give back your lightsaber, even though you're the one person that's actually obeyed us. So she goes off into hiding, disconnected from the Force. Part of the reason they do that actually is because they're terrified of the fact that that's even possible. They think that she, and she probably does, kind of carry a wound in the Force from being in close proximity to that destruction, and they're worried that she will cause the death of the Force itself. So they just want her out of their hair, go away, and don't do anything more Jedi-like. How are we on time, by the way?
We're good.
Okay,
It's 11:30.
excellent. Digression. The True Sith and the MMO. So, throughout Knights of the Old Republics 1 and 2, it's kind of established that the reason that Darth Revan started getting more evil and started turning his Jedi evil and like doing these types of things is that he realized that there was a Sith threat out in the galaxy. And based on the things that certain people say in the second Knights of the Old Republic game, it seems like there's maybe not a lot of them, but they're like a couple of extremely powerful Sith Lords who have like these weird, creepy, esoteric abilities. Like, one of the people you fight in KOTOR 2 is a person who's so evil that even though his body is like blown up, he's holding himself together through pure hatred. So like people with teachings kind of like that who can do that sort of things. Or like Darth Nihilus, who's able to like, he's consumed by his own hunger and he just sucks the life out of everything without even trying. So like weird, offbeat, creepy things like that seem to be what's hiding, and that's what they're building up to. Well, after a certain point though, BioWare created the MMO, which is called the Old Republic. And in that, they revealed that the Sith threat, which this lady specifically said is not a Sith Empire, to be a regular Sith Empire, basically exactly like Palpatine's later Empire, with this huge military-industrial complex, and they had this gigantic war with the Republic that Revan was somehow trying to stop, because... Anyways, so this is one of the other kind of points of divergence here, because this being an MMO with 8 classes, each with their own unique story, that's still going on and still getting expansions, I'm going to kind of hand-wave it away, because we don't actually know how the story ends, and also it's kind of somewhat dumber than what they had set up before. Yes, Richard?
Did you play any of the MMO?
I tried to download it, but then my computer wouldn't, do it. Because I don't think I actually had enough space. It was actually quite big. So instead of there being like a few enclaves of like really creepy, like super powerful Sith, they had one super powerful Sith who's actually controlling every single faction. These are all the same character. And so he has the Sith Empire, and then when he's in this guy, he's actually another more secret Sith Empire somewhere else that invades the first Empire.
Is this powerful Sith named Xehanort?
No, but he's a lot like Xehanort. He's called Vitiate, or Tenebrae, or Valkorion, or the Sith Emperor, and probably a few other names as well. And so like, that's what it ends up retconned into being, is like his empire is what Revan tried to stop. And Revan like has a whole storyline in expansions of this where he kills him and then tries to bring the Sith Emperor back to life so he can kill him properly. There's all sorts of things where he's like tortured for 200 years. I don't know the story very well, and it would probably be a whole lecture the length of this just to try and explain it. Because like I said, this MMO has had like 6 expansions now, and they're all very story heavy. So for now, I'm just going to be like, there is a shadowy Sith threat out there that Darth Revan is trying to stop. And that's why he did a lot of the things that he did. As far as the MMO is concerned, the reason Revan fully turns to the dark side is he finds the Sith Emperor, and the Sith Emperor immediately just mind controls him in terms of evil. What they had kind of set up in the previous games was that he realized there was this dark threat out there. He never met it personally, but he knew it was there. And he's like, I need to become an evil Sith Lord, take over the Republic in a war, but like protect all of its industry and stuff so that we can militarize and be ready to stop this thing. And so he was like doing that on purpose, whereas in this one he's like unwittingly controlled by the bidding of the Emperor. It doesn't really matter because it's his own internal motivation. All the things that he does after this point are the same. Which is that he comes back into the Republic, he starts looking for the Star Forge more earnestly because now we're Sith Lords, and you saw Revan and Malak, who before he had a jaw, but he got into a little spat with these two and he lost his jaw. And he became the Master and he became the Apprentice before they were just Jedi friends. And so they're invading the Republic with the Star Forge to try and build it up either as part of the secret plan of the Sith Emperor or on his own idea to basically militarize it and be ready. Because he knows that the Republic is weak after all these wars and that the Jedi, they've proven they can't fight a war, so maybe if we have a bunch of Sith Lords in control, we'll be able to repel these other more evil Sith. And then things can go back to normal after that. So they find their way to the planet Lihan, also known as Rakata Prime. He crashes there because there's like a disruptor field around the planet. He talks to the native Rakatans who have kind of devolved at this point. They're more like tribal. They don't remember a lot of their old technology. But he tricks them into letting him go into this temple, and he hides a Sith holocron there, which describes some ideas that will later be picked up by Darth Bane. And they escape back into the system, and they find the Star Forge and starts building his fleet. So this fleet, made by Revan and Malak, is the quote-unquote Sith Empire that is attacking the Republic at the beginning of Knights of the Old Republic 1. Although we're a little bit away from that happening because one more event has to happen yet. These are like regular troopers that were with him during the Mandalorian Wars, and they're now working for him as Sith troopers. Even though these guys do not have the Force, regular people still look at them and they're like, "You're a Sith," which is a little funny. So, at a certain point, Bastila and some other Jedi Knights invade the bridge of Darth Revan, and they're like, "We're going to kill you." And he's like, "Uh-oh." And Darth Malak is like, "You know what? I've always been a little bit upset by you, especially if you could cut off my jaw." So he blows him up, killing Revan and becoming the sole Sith Emperor of their current little thing. Bastila, however, escapes onto the Endar Spire, which is a ship there, which is promptly attacked by Darth Malak's Sith apprentice, Darth Bandan. There's only a few survivors. Bastila herself gets out in an escape pod. A captain of the Republic named Carth Onasi gets out, and your generic player character gets out. And those three land on the planet of Terrace, which is the same place that had... There's the raccoons. I know I have a picture of them somewhere. Maybe they drink water. Hopefully this picks up really loud on the mic. So, now that we're into the video game, we have video game type objectives, where we're trying to basically find Bastila. And she has fallen under the hands of one of the gangs on Terrace, and you have to win her, because she is a slave, in a swoop bite race. So there's a whole bunch of side quests to get to this point, running through the lower city and the undercity and the upper city, going to all these places, but it eventually leads to you winning the swoop bite race, which is like a predecessor to pod racing, to get Bastila back. And she is your prize, but she is of course a Jedi, so you don't actually get to keep her. She's a party member now. They have to quickly escape though, because word has gotten out that Bastila has survived, and it's important that Bastila die because she has a special Force technique known as battle meditation. She can basically give a buff to every person on her side of a conflict by meditating in the Force, which is extremely good for like coordinating attacks and stuff. So like she's a threat to him being able to do what he wants, because Malak, he doesn't care so much about like defending the galaxy against this external Sith threat. He just wants to rule everything. So he does something Revan would have never done, which is just blow up a whole city and all of its economies and infrastructure and stuff. Revan was very particular when he was in charge about not doing that sort of thing. He wanted to win, but preserve as much of the like factories and things as possible, because he wanted to remilitarize afterward. So they escape on the ship of Davik Kang, known as the Ebon Hawk. Davik Kang, of course, dies in the conflagration here, and this ship is theirs, even though they stole it. I'm still in the frame, right? Okay. So we pick up a few more party members. Another person who gets out of the blown-up planet of Terrace is this guy named Canderous Ordo. He's a veteran of the Mandalorian Wars. Of course, now that the Mandalorians as a military entity have been kind of smashed and shattered, they've gone off to be mercenaries and bounty hunters and the like. One interesting little war story he tells is that one time when he was out there on the edges of the galaxy, he saw this like goopy asteroid or meteor that was flying around and seemed to be alive. He blew it up. That will come back much, much later, because this is actually one of the first scouts of the Yuuzhan Vong, who were made much, much later. But that is a reference to that when he tells that story in the game. So, after escaping Terrace, we go to Dantooine, where the Jedi Council is. And the Jedi Council realize that the player character, of course, has access to the Force, so this is where you get to train as a Jedi. If you want to save as many levels, because in the game, when you're playing... when you like level up, you have like different choices. After you become a Jedi, you have all these options for Force powers and lightsaber techniques. So if you want to min-max, you want to avoid leveling up, only level up to like level 4 when you're on Terrace, and then just keep the XP after that. And then you level up a bunch once you become a Jedi, and you'll be much, much stronger for the rest of the game. Basically, your goal is you have to find the star maps, basically retread the tracks of Revan and Malak, and find the Star Forge, because that is where Malak's home base is. We gotta blow that thing up, or else he's just gonna be able to keep pumping out ships and droids, and we won't be able to keep up. So the first planet they go to is Tatooine, where the star map is defended by a Krayt Dragon, and where HK-47, Darth Revan's old assassin droid, is just being sold for sale at a junk shop. And you pick up those guys. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of side quests and like stuff along the way on this planet, because it's a big, long RPG. But that's the main thing you're trying to do on Tatooine. is getting that star map, which is defended by the Great Dragon. So you have to lure it out and blow it up. Then you go in there, and some other guys come in and try to get you. But you get them. The next one is Kashyyyk, which at this point the planet is under the control of the Zerka Corporation, which is enslaving the Wookiees. They're being betrayed from within by another Wookiee who's in your party, Zalbar. His brother is like selling them out, and so you've got to deal with them. And at the same time, go to the lower levels of Kashyyyk and try to find the star map there. There's monsters running around. It's protected by like a computer terminal. You also pick up an old Jedi named Jolee Bindo. He's kind of a funny little guy. I don't think I have a picture of him though. The third planet is Manaan, which is the place that makes the Kolto, which is like second-rate Bacta. Manaan is kind of cool because it's neutral in this war between the Sith and the Republic. Because basically everybody needs their healing juice. So there's this like tense situation where both sides are there, not killing each other, and they're trying to secretly undermine each other with like spycraft and stuff. Do I have the picture? No, I don't. You end up having to go under the water to a place where the Republic has been secretly mining Kolto, breaking the tree, and you have to. There's this big fish there that's basically defending against the star map, and you have to either make your light side or dark side choice, which is blow up the generators, which are making the fish angry, or you can kill the fish. Because that big fish was actually turning these guys insane down there. It was kind of like not zombie, this is kind of like Lovecraft fish people, honestly. But anyways, you get that star map, and you've got 3 of them now, and you're on your way to the 4th one on Korriban, when Darth Malak's ship, the Leviathan, shows up and yanks you out of hyperspace and forces you to dock. And on there, when Darth Malak shows up, he's like, by the way, you knew that I would challenge your supremacy, and you're like, what? Turns out, your generic player character was actually Darth Revan the whole time.
Oh my god.
Turns out, he survived the bridge getting blown up by this guy, and the Jedi Strike Team were able to wipe his memory, which is why you know the Force, and you're also a blank slate RPG character, because your memory was literally wiped. But that's why you have all this potential and why everyone cares about what happens to you and are trying to retrain you, because they're like, well, if we just wipe the Sith Lord's mind, he'll become a Jedi again and work for us. And that's actually kind of what happens in the canon ending. You can, of course, choose in this series to go light or dark, but the light side ending is the canon one. So, you're on your way. I guess I forgot to have a picture for Korriban, but the 4th star map is on Korriban. You go there, you help out this Sith instructor lady who's actually nicer than she seems and help her realize that maybe you don't want to be a Sith. But anyways, they finally get the coordinates and they go to Lihan or Rakata Prime. They get hit by the same disruptive field that had crashed Darth Revan's ship earlier, and so you crash, and you're having to do all the same sort of stuff, find your way into the temple so you can get back up. Oh, by the way, when you were captured by Darth Malak for a little bit, he took Bastila and turned her to the dark side. But she's actually not that bad. She's just kind of being edgy at this point, because she's kind of been the Jedi, like, goody two-shoes girl this whole time, and so she just wants to put on her emo makeup. But she realizes that she likes this Jedi who she's grown close to, who used to be Darth Revan, a lot more than Malak, and she'll join our side eventually. And so the Republic comes in, they know the route here, so they start attacking, and on the inside, you're fighting off all these droids, and eventually fighting Darth Malak, who's much stronger than before, because he has a bunch of captured Jedi that he's using as batteries, so every time he gets low on health, he does a force drain on them to refill his health bar. But eventually, he either does that enough times, or you go up and like kill them ahead of time, and anyways, you can beat him pretty handily, because this is the final boss, and you're usually pretty over-leveled by this point. And so everybody's happy. This is the light side ending. Your whole squad is there. The Jedi are there. Everything is good. But Revan, of course, knows, because he's going by Revan now, again. He realizes that whatever I was up to the first time is still out there. So I have to head off to the unknown regions by myself with my ship, with my droid T3, this one, and try and figure out what's going on. Yes?
Why do the Jedi ever try to use this technique again, where they just capture a Sith and just like make them a blank slate and convert them back? Because it seems like it worked pretty well this time, so they should.
Well, the only reason it worked this time, remember, was because he had got knocked out by that explosion on his bridge from being betrayed. So normally you can't capture a Sith Lord alive. That's actually quite hard to do. But theoretically, that they probably should do that more often. Yes, yeah. I don't think they do. Yes.
Who is your favorite party member?
My favorite party member, probably Canderous. I think he's a fun little guy, and there's later Mandalorians named after him. Oh, by the way, one of the Mandalorians on the Mandalorian side, back during the war against them, who committed that atrocity on the planet Cathar was named Cassius Fett. So his family's been around for a long time, and Django is a descendant of him. I also like HK-47. I like his way of talking, where he's like, statement, Master, I want to kill these meatbags. So he takes off into the unknown regions. With him gone, though, the surviving Sith, or people that have stumbled across Sith teachings, or people who were corrupted by Revan's own actions into becoming Sith, end up coming out of the woodwork. So we have Darth Sion here. This is the guy who's technically dead, but he's so evil and upset and angry and in pain that he holds himself together out of just coping and seething. And here we have Darth Nihilus, who, despite being technically... He's usually ranked pretty high when people rank him in power rankings, but they make it clear that he's actually weak because his power, his hunger, which drains life and can even suck entire planets dry, is controlling him, not the other way around. He can't choose not to do that. He's passively draining the life of his own bridge crew, and every so often he just has to like eat a planet. So like he's very powerful as in terms of hard to go up against, but he's not like wanting to do that necessarily. He's not in control. He's just sort of a force of nature at this point, succumbed to his own force powers. And then we have Kreia, who is actually Darth Traya, which is actually also... she is Darth Revan's former master. Everyone that she trains kind of turns out a little bit weird because she has some weird ideas, but she ends up being found on in the Ebon Hawk, Revan's ship, floating around through space. And T3, the droid, finds her and brings her to a mining facility where the Jedi Exile is, Mitra Surik, which begins Knights of the Old Republic 2. And the main idea of Knights of the Old Republic 2 is that the Sith Lords, Darth Nihilus and Darth Sion, are sending these guys out to try and kill a bunch of the Jedi. This is technically the first Jedi Purge, also known as like the Dark Wars or something. Anyways, it's to rally the surviving Jedi and also try and draw out the threat of Darth Nihilus so we can kill him. Because eventually he will get so hungry he'll just eat the whole galaxy. Sooner or later he has to be dealt with. There's no bargaining with him. He's not like rational anymore. He's just hungry, and sooner or later he'll be a problem for everybody, so we got to deal with him. And so there's all these different things, but in each planet you go to in the second game, you're trying to find a hidden Jedi Master who has survived this purge. That one there is Atris. She's kind of a bitch. And bring them together and draw them out. Yes?
Who do you play as in the second game?
You play as the Jedi Exile, also known as Mitra Surik, the person who cut herself off from the Force.
Okay.
And so you do use Force powers in the game, but it seems to be that her connections with other people allow her to like use the Force through them. But there's this whole thing of even the Jedi that you befriend, they're like, that's kind of weird. Like, you shouldn't be able to use the Force. I feel nothing when I sense you. Like, you're just a hole. Also, you're a wound in the Force that I'm scared of. But we have to do something about Nihilus, who's another wound in the Force. We have to kill him. Probably you're the only one that can do it, because you're kind of like two of the same sort of thing. This is just a cool location. I think it was redone in like Unreal Engine. But this is actually the tomb of Friedan Nad from all the way back on the moon of Duxon. I just thought that was a neat location. Also, Dantooine gets blown up at some point, so all the Jedi there are not there. They're hiding elsewhere. Also in this picture, you can see HK-50 droids, which are silver versions of HK-47 that are reproducing at some plant somewhere that you're going to have to deal with along the way in the story, because you can't just have a bunch of assassin droids running around everywhere being built at a factory on their own. Not good. So they show up every so often. You can take parts out of them and put them into HK-47. It's cool. You find him again, too. Kreia is an interesting character because she thinks she's kind of above all this whole light side, dark side nonsense of being like a good or a bad person. And so this comes across in the game of her being extremely cryptic. In your dialogue choices with her, like something like this will usually pop up at the end talking about how you've gained and lost influence with her based on your choices in the conversation. You've said light and dark side things. It's almost impossible to make her happy. Nothing you do will ever like satisfy her because she's kind of a troll. This references a point on Nar Shaddaa when there's some beggars out there. And they're asking for like 5 credits, which is a tiny amount of money. And if you give it to them, she'll be like, you've made them weak. Someone else will come along and kill them for those credits. You've increased the amount of suffering in the universe. And if you tell them, no, you can't have my credits, she'll be like, you bastard. He was begging for money. Why didn't you help him? So there's really no pleasing her. Because the only thing she is pleased with is the death of the Force. She is so out there that she's like, well, the Force is like kind of controlling things. She's like, I want true free will to exist. I'm going to use you and echo a wound in the Force. I'm going to kill you on Malachor 5 to end the Force itself. And you're like, well, isn't the Force created by all life? Wouldn't killing it like kill all the life? That's, like, would that just murder everyone? She's like, I don't. That's a risk I'm willing to take. Of course, she didn't realize that there is a species known as Ysalamiri, which can actually project a bubble in which the Force doesn't exist. So she could have just used that. But that didn't show up in the game. Anyways, so to deal with these... Oh, by the way, you gather all the Jedi together, and then she goes ahead and kills them. So all those Jedi Masters that you spent all this time saving, she just ends anyway after betraying you. She's like, I'm actually Darth Treya, because I betray ya. She has a cool technique where she levitates 3 purple lightsabers with the Force and uses that to attack. She doesn't actually swing her arms around, which is kind of neat. But yeah, you end up killing Darth Nihilus. He isn't that big of a deal for you. Anyone else would lose to him, but since you're also a wound in the Force, you can deal with him, kill him, end that threat. And yeah, so there's very few Jedi left at this point, except for yourself and your party members, many of whom are Force sensitive, and you can actually recruit and train into being a Jedi throughout the course of the game, which is really cool. They'll start out as just like a blaster character, and then later they can get a lightsaber and start doing stuff, which is awesome. I saw you had a question?
Oh no, I was just thinking like I think the reason she does that not just to hold 3 lightsabers, but she's only one-handed at that point.
Yes, that's right. She's basically those other 2 Sith Lords at some point turned on her, which is why she ended up wounded on the Ebon Hawk, and yeah, her arm was cut off, and that's why she's black-pilled on the Sith and the Jedi at this point. She just wants the Force to be done. And she's the one who gives all this lore about Revan, like, turning to the dark side on purpose so he could save the galaxy, because, like, she kind of knew what his deal was. She was his master at one point. She's also, most likely, the mother of Handmaiden, who's one of the characters in your party. I don't have a picture of her, but there's some hints there that she was that character's mother, which doesn't really come up, but it's kind of neat. Yes?
Who's the father?
The father was an Ichani general that fought during the Mandalorian Wars, you never see his picture. But, yeah. There's just, like, hints to that. It's not 100% confirmed, but it's one of those things where if you read between the lines, it's pretty solid. So anyways, those guys are dealt with, she's dealt with. The Jedi Order is restarted from yourself and your party members and any of the other surviving Jedi that you've found around the galaxy, and things are getting back to normal. This is called the Inter-Sith War period, and it's mostly peaceful. Except, of course, if you count the MMO as canon, in that case, the galaxy has basically had its worst war ever, because this massive Sith Armada invades right now, and I guess Revan wasn't able to stop that from happening out in the unknown regions. And there's this massive galactic civil war between the Sith and the Jedi that lasts for a long time in like 6 or 7 expansions. They sack Coruscant and take over the Jedi Temple, and there's all this stuff. But a lot of the books that take place right after this, that came out earlier, don't mention there being a conflict. They talk about the last thing that happened in the galaxy was Revan. So that's another reason it's like it doesn't super fit, but it also kind of fits. You can make of it what you will. I don't have really anything against it, except that it's too long and complicated for me to learn all of the lore of it, because I haven't played it. But anyways, after this time of peace or incessant warfare, we have the 4th Great Schism, in which a Jedi, I forget his name, but he becomes Darth Ruin, and he starts the new Sith Wars. And they go on for a while, and there's a bunch of guys. But the most important thing during this period is in 1010 BBY, a man named Skir Khan, later known as Lord Khan, he creates the Brotherhood of Darkness. He's like, you know what? All of these Sith vying for control and calling themselves Darth, like, they got too big of egos. We should all be friends on the dark side here. We can all be equals, which will definitely work out. They never betray each other. So they all call themselves Lord whatever, but they never call themselves Darth, because that's, like, too intense. Yes?
What's going on with that lightsaber there? Is that, like, made of wood?
I think it's just because of, like, you can see it's a very smeary art style. I think this is metal. It's just kind of drawn weird.
Well, it's that thing at the end, though. It just looks like splinters.
Or like
yeah. No, the end of the lightsaber.
I think it's got, like, there's, like, a ball of pommel on it, I think, with, like, divots in it.
It does kind of look like split up wood, though. I know.
Looks like the end of a branch.
It could be. I mean, there are lightsabers that'll have, like, a wood casing on it. It's, like, this is the only picture of this guy, so I can't really say for sure. But the other guy, Lord Khan, he shows up, and basically he's like, we can all be equal on the dark side, we can all be friends here, right? Even though, we're controlled by the dark side, and the more you use the dark side, the more evil you become, which makes it easier to use the dark side. That'll be fine. And so they have this war against the Jedi called the Light and Darkness War. And along the way, a miner for Cartosis, I believe, who had some odd luck at the Pazak tables, named Bane, realizes that he has the Force and joins their army. He actually starts not with the Force. He just starts as a foot soldier, but he does so well in the regular fights that they're like, oh yeah, you got the Force, don't you? You just like snipe 3 people with that crappy blaster rifle without looking. Yes.
I want to hear more about Pazak.
Okay, so Pazak is kind of like Blackjack, and it's the predecessor to Sabak, which is the later version of the game in which Han Solo used to win. You can play Pazak in both Knights of the Old Republic games. It's a little bit like a deck building game because like rare cards can be like found and won and bought and added to your deck. The idea of it is you draw cards from your deck and you try to add up to 20, I believe, not 21. The big difference between it and Blackjack is you have negative cards, so you can go back lower. And there's also cards that have like plus or minus, or there's 0 cards. So there's a little more strategy as to like what you want to be in your deck. It's not just like a regular deck of cards that you're dealt out. You have your own deck that you play with. And you can win credits doing so if you're good. I usually was pretty bad. Yes.
Sorry. His name was Bane before he became a Sith?
I don't know. He had a regular name. I don't remember what it was.
Okay.
But very quickly, as soon as he becomes a Sith, he's like, I'm Lord Bane.
It's probably Aang.
It's probably Tom Hardy.
Actually, my phone's not in here. I was going to look it up. It doesn't matter what his name was because he stopped using it because he's like, I was just a slave miner basically, mining for rocks on this planet. I hate my old life. I'm Bane now. For you. So here's some of the big players in the Light and Darkness War. Here we have Bane after he becomes more Sithy. I forget what this guy's name was. He's one of the higher ups. So even though they're all equals, there is still like an inner circle of higher ups in Lord Khan's army. This girl is named Githany. She betrays him a couple times and like kisses him with like poison. And I think she becomes a Jedi at one point and then switches back. It's a whole thing at this point, too, that the Jedi are starting to only take younger members into the Order. So if you want to become a Jedi, they'll never turn down a Sith who's repenting. So there's people that'll actually join the Sith army, try not to get too evil, and then switch over to defect to the Jedi. And then the Jedi will welcome them with open arms, and they get to be a Jedi. Yes.
Is that a lightsaber whip?
Yes, that is a light whip. It's a rare weapon. There's only a few people who use it. I think only Darksiders. But yeah, I don't know how it works, but it's a whip that acts like a lightsaber. It cuts through things.
It can bend.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It can like wrap around a lightsaber blade too and like yank it out of their hand. This guy is named Lord Hoth. He's your rough general guy. I don't know if he's named after the planet or the planet's named after him. I should have, but I think the planet's named after him actually, because it was not the rebel base on Hoth is there because it's an out of the way crappy little planet. So probably it wasn't even known about in his time. I'm guessing it was named after him. This guy is named Valentine Farfalla, and he's half Bothan. If you remember the Bothans playing with Battlefront or whatever, they're the so he's like half furry. He's got these legs, but he's a human on top. Yes.
Does he also have like the little stealth cloaking belt too?
No, he doesn't. He just has the Jedi cloaking belt. So these guys are fighting a war, and Bane here is realizing that there's going to be infighting between the Sith. They can't all just be equals. So he calls himself Darth Bane, and everyone's like, "Oh, you're calling it." But he's a higher up in the organization. They don't super care. But he actually comes across Darth Revan's old holocron at some point, as he's kind of searching through the galaxy finding stuff. And it has this idea that Revan put in there, which is that you can have a lot of soldiers and a lot of like lesser Jedi that you've turned, but there should only be yourself, and you should only take on one apprentice. If you take on like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 apprentices, they're just going to team up and kill you. And Bane looks at it and he's like, that's a good idea. And actually, maybe there should only be 1 Sith Master and 1 Sith Apprentice. Because the thing that keeps happening in all these wars is that some of the Darksiders, they'll turn and become Jedi, or there'll be a bunch of them, and a bunch of weaker ones will team up to kill a stronger one. So all this knowledge keeps getting lost. And he has to keep going around the galaxy finding out old holocrons and scrolls and stuff to relearn it all. And he doesn't want that. He wants the Sith knowledge to be more concentrated. Because the Jedi, embodying peace and hope and love and stuff, are able to work together really well, and the Sith aren't. So maybe having a giant army of a bunch of Sith is a bad idea, because they'll turn on each other. And so he's like, how can I turn on these guys to make it easier for that to not happen in the future? So the battle ends up taking them to Ruusan, which is an important planet, and they have 7 different battles there in this campaign. And the first one is how the Sith basically invaded. There was 2 fleets, both of them had battle meditation, but they infiltrate the bridge and are able to destroy the Jedi ship, and they're able to land on the planet. In the second one, the Republic fails to retake it. And the third one is how Lord Hoth managed to establish a Jedi presence on the ground in Ruusan. They basically flew in on small ships instead of big ones to get through the blockade. because they're all Jedi, so like if we're all in fighter jets, it doesn't matter. We can just kind of sneak down to the surface and regroup there. And you end up with all these ground wars happening. Darth Bane was in a bacta tank for a lot of it, I think after Githany betrayed him. Not 100% sure on that. But anyways, the 7th Battle of Ruusan is the important one. So Darth Bane, he had been going throughout the galaxy before this particular part of the war, had found an old Sith ritual known as a thought bomb, where a bunch of Sith Lords could get to... Yes?
How do you spell thought?
Like you're thinking, not that over there.
I was thinking the second part. Not
it only kills thought.
Goodbye, Githany.
Githany does get killed by the thought. I don't have it here, but there's a picture from a comic book of her just like turning into a skeleton in midair. But anyways, what happens here is he has this ritual and he realizes the way this ritual works is a bunch of Sith Lords can pool their energy together and say certain spells or whatever, and then this thing will just kill every Force user in like a huge radius. But he basically modifies the site and he's like, hey, Mr. Khan, sir, I think you guys are so good at the dark side that if you do this, you'll actually survive. And so he makes sure he's well away from the epicenter of the blast when this happens. The Jedi come in, Lord Khan does his thing, and it actually just drains all the life out of the planet. All the Sith, all the Jedi, all of them end up kind of sucked into a vortex, like their spirits or whatever. And everybody is killed. So Darth Bane has engineered every Sith has been killed, basically, except for himself. But in doing so, he fulfills a prophecy of the Sith Ari. Anyways, after the battle, the surviving Jedi who weren't on the planet come and they make like a little monument here. This is called the Valley of the Jedi, and it'll be important in part 2. But anyways, it's like a Force nexus because this bomb is like got all the souls of the Jedi and the Sith in there, and it's very strong in the Force. And this planet is kind of hidden from the rest of the galaxy because they realize that the Force energy here could be used for bad purposes. So Darth Bane, being the sole survivor, he's got his whole philosophy of the rule of 2, and he's the one who starts it. And all of the Sith that we see from this point onward, pretty much, through the prequels and all the way up to like Darth Vader, are following this sort of example. They're all descended from Darth Bane, where the Sith Master, who knows everything, not everything, but like he knows all the dark side stuff, will take on an apprentice, teach them a little bit at a time, get them stronger and stronger, and then the apprentice, when the apprentice feels is ready, will turn on the master and try to kill them. And if they succeed, then obviously they were worthy of being the master, and if they fail, then he'll just take on a new apprentice because they weren't worthy to kill him. So it's all about whoever wins will be the strongest one in the Force or the best at lightsabers and the most tricksy. Basically, this ensures that the Sith will always survive, whoever's in charge will be good at something, and this way they can slowly hide in the shadows with only 2 people and undermine the fall of the Republic and the Jedi over a long period of time, basically doing like a shadow game, sneaking, corrupting here and there, buying off politicians, whatever, instead of having a massive army, because the last 10 times that's tried, the Jedi have won every single time. Yes?
They cheat that rule a lot, though.
Yes. In fact, Darth Bane cheats that rule. And as he gets older, he realizes that he thinks Xana isn't that good. Turns out she was just like pretending not to be so she could betray him more easily. But he thinks she's not that great. He takes on a different secret apprentice named Darth Cognis to be her replacement in case it turned out that she wasn't good enough. And he also bothers to learn a technique known as essence transfer. So during the final confrontation between these two, with Darth Cognis watching, basically, like, it all comes clear, and she's like, I'm going to fight you, I'm going to fight you. And Darth Cognis, the second apprentice, is like, I'm just going to wait here, and whichever one of you wins is who I will work for. And during the final confrontation, Darth Bane actually tries to use essence transfer and basically possess her. It doesn't work. Maybe a little bit of his, like, juice got in there, because she ends up with, like, a tick of, like, a twitching hand that he had. But basically, he's dead at this point. And, yeah. So the thing with the Sith is, like, the apprentice will sometimes take on their own apprentice for, like, as soon as they're ready. They can, kill the master and have an apprentice immediately. Sometimes the master will have backup apprentices. So, I mean, it's working better than the previous thing where there's just a bunch of open Sith. But yeah, they don't really obey any rules with it. Like, they kind of try, but they're in it for themselves. To be a Sith is to be selfish. So, like, the goal is to be able to kill the Jedi off one day. But if you have to, you're not, like, bound to this rule. You don't care about it for itself. You care about it because it'll help you kill the Jedi one day. And if you yourself somehow manage to discover immortality, well, then screw the rules. You can be the one to do it. And that's actually what Darth Plagueis tried to do. So, in 1000 BBY, which is when that battle happened and the Sith were wiped out pretty much, is the Rusan Reformation. So this guy is named Tarsus Valorum. So if you remember, Chancellor Valorum is a different one, Finis Valorum, but like they end up being the Supreme Chancellor for a while. He's not a Jedi, even though for the past 400 years all the Supreme Chancellors have been Jedi. So this is kind of the Jedi start to get out of politics at this point. The Senate and the core worlds get a little more powerful at this point. They redraw what kind of gerrymander the districts, and they get rid of a standing army for the Republic. So up to this point, there had been like Republic troopers. Now it's like sector defense fleets, or if you're a planet, you have your own thing. If you think about like Naboo has its Royal Navy, but there's no like overall galactic army. And hello.
Batteries?
Is that your last slide?
This might be the last slide, actually. This is so we are brought up to the point where this is the end of the Old Republic and the start of the Galactic Republic, even though it's really one entity, like we talked about before. So the next lecture will begin at this point, kind of leading up through the prequel era, and then everything after that. Does anyone have any questions as of right now? Yes.
How accurate is like the sci-fi stuff in there with like hyperspace and all that? Do they like try to make a conscious effort to do that, or to make it semi-realistic, or do they just do whatever they want that's convenient?
Some of the books try to make it more realistic. I think like the X-Wing novels will talk about how, like if you watch the Star Wars movies, they're maneuvering like fighter jets, which you really couldn't do in space. So they talk about having like ether rudders that will allow them to steer in the ether of space. But like all the like faster than light stuff is kind of hand waved away. My favorite example of that is, if you know from physics class, like traveling faster than light would cause all sorts of like problems with like time travel and like causality would be messed up. So there's actually something it's like called causal or like temporal. There's a type of shielding that prevents those chronological anomalies from happening. And that's like the plot armor shield. And I think that there's like a funny little article on StarWars.com or whatever about somebody who's that shield flickered or failed for a little bit, and he woke up like 1,000 years in the past. But really, that stuff doesn't happen. They just kind of hand wave it away for the most part. Yes.
So as far as like I guess sort of this presentation is concerned, we don't accept whatchamacallit, the Old Republic like MMO as technical canon.
You could, because remember, the only things that it would kind of really contradict is the sort of shadowy lore about the Sith Empire that probably would have been cooler and creepier in a KOTOR 3 versus the MMO. But like it's the same sort of thing. Like that's still the reason Darth Revan turned. It's just there's more story there that I'm not going over. And also, the other thing that it would have kind of slotted into is about 1,000 years of peace. So if you want to fit another war in there, you can. But I am just not well-versed in it at all.
So I know it's not part of this Legends canon that you're talking about, but have we passed the point where the new like High Republic continuity would have been? Or is that closer to like the next part?
I think the High Republic is like a couple hundred years before Attack of the Clones. So it'd be a little bit after this.
Okay.
Or sorry, not the Phantom Menace, not Attack of the Clones.
I'm assuming the character that's just a rock isn't in Legends.
Legends does have some rock people. It's probably not the same one.
This one's just a one slab of stone that sits there, but he's a dude.
Well, there are beings. They're not in either PowerPoint because they're not important to anything. But they're called the Iron Knights, and they are sentient crystals that are kind of taken out of their little crystal thing and put into a robot body, where then they serve as Jedi Knights because they are also Force sensitive. So there's all sorts of weird stuff like that.
Could you put one of those crystal people in a lightsaber?
I don't know if you could. It would probably kill them, but I mean, maybe. So, the thing about Star Wars, like, the expanded universe especially, is that there's all these, like, kids' books and cartoons and stuff that, like, you can just kind of do whatever. So, any weird thing you can think of has probably been done at some point. Like, I think there was a children's comic book that involved a planet that the Ewoks found, and the entire planet was a living being. Or, like, a mountain that could cry or something. Like... There's a gooey cube that C-3PO gets stuck in called Waru, who's existed for like 1 million years and has like a dimension inside of him. There's all sorts of weird stuff like that doesn't really connect to anything or matter. But like a slab of rock that's just a thinking slab, like I would have no doubt that there's stuff like that out there. I mean, even like they can even be Jedi if they're a crystal. Yes.
I forgot what I was going to say.
Darth Revan! You forgot!
Oh, the Jedi got you.
The Jedi got you!
already got the mask on. Okay, yes. The wills. Are we going to cover any of that stuff?
So the Whills, because it's like WH,
Mm-hmm.
are like a mysterious thing that the original drafts of the Star Wars was like, these are copied from the Journal of the Whills. And they're like connected to the Force in some way. I think they kind of show up in the Clone Wars cartoon a little bit as like that weird planet that Yoda goes to.
Mm.
But like, they're supposedly where Qui-Gon Jinn learns about like how to exist as a Force ghost. But they don't do a whole lot. They're just kind of like maybe the original users of the Force, and it's not clear how they connect to anything or the Celestials. It's always kind of like this background thing that's sprinkled in every so often.
So that they're never brought up in like actual expanded universe content.
Like they're mentioned, but I don't think you ever see them. Like what they look like is totally unknown. They're maybe connected to the midi-chlorians. I believe in one of the like leaked drafts of George Lucas of like how he wanted the sequel trilogy to go, they would end up in the world of the Whills, which would actually like be inside a human cell or something. And they would be like, everyone would be shrunk down and fighting inside a cell, apparently. And so maybe they are the midi-chlorians. Midi-chlorians, by the way, Qui-Gon Jinn talks about them, but they're these symbiotic little microscopic life forms that live inside of the cells of living beings, and they are sort of the intermediary between the Force and a person. And the more midi-chlorians, higher count you have, is an indicator of having a higher Force sensitivity or more aptitude with it. They don't create the Force. The Force is created by life, but they are kind of the go-between that allows you to connect to and use the Force.
Can you spread midichlorians like an STD?
You can, I think, inject them into someone. I don't think they would live very long in another body, but there are, Sith experiments using the midichlorians in the Darth Plagueis novel. Yes?
So from that, what you're technically saying is that if a Jedi were to eat another Jedi, they would gain more midichlorians because they're sort of taking that sort of, vitamin and that sort of sense to increase
You'd
their
probably
count.
be a dark Jedi or a Sith at that point.
I think the midichlorians are kind of tied to the being that they belong to. So, if I stole your midichlorians, they'd probably only last an hour or something, barring any sort of extreme thing.
But you could juice then.
That'd be a powerful
you
hour.
could build up a super powerful attack by sacrificing
You probably could. I think there's also Darth Plagueis' master, Darth. It's not Venomous. It was a different one. Doesn't matter. Tenebris, Darth Tenebris, actually had a technique where he could actually possess his own midichlorians with his Force essence. It didn't work out very well for him because he went into Darth Plagueis' midichlorians after himself got killed, but in doing so, he ended up stuck in a time loop or something. It's kind of weird. But there's all sorts of weirdness you can do with that. And again, the concept of midichlorians only ever existed starting in Episode 1, so all the stuff that written and came out before that doesn't mention them at all. And even so, you can kind of, unless you're a scientist that works in midichlorians, they don't really matter, because it's still a person using the Force. They're just kind of an indicator of how good you are at it. And their exact relationship is still a mystery, even to the Jedi and the Sith. Alright, yes.
Can we go to Buc-ee's now?
Yes.
Yeah, Buc-ee's!
Alright, welcome back, class.
Yay!
I trust we've all had a worthwhile excursion.
I
to the
had brisket.
That's good.
I had
Full
brisket.
Was it Bantha brisket?
Dude, I wish.
Alright, we come back here to part 2 of the lecture on Star Wars Legends. Remember, we left off at the Ruusan Reformation. This is beginning the Great Peace of the Republic. Darth Bane and his apprentice Darth Zana are in hiding, and the Sith will remain in hiding for the next 1,000 years. Of course, like we talked about, he did train second apprentice Darth Cognis in case that one didn't work out, but she eventually did work out, and she became Dark Lord of the Sith and took Cognis as her apprentice, and so on and so forth. There's no exact list of exactly how many generations there were of Sith, but there were quite a few. And they're sort of working in the shadows to slowly bring down the Republic as this is going on. Since we're now into kind of the prequel era, we can talk about what are the different ranks of Jedi and their roles. So, when they're first just a child, they're a youngling. Of course, at this era, the Jedi are basically, some would say kidnapping, but often they're volunteered, getting babies. They don't train people above a certain age. Anakin was 9, and he was considered normally too old. Then they become a Padawan, or they may go through an initiate phase first. then they a Knight aspirant, so basically they want to be a Jedi Knight, and then they pass the trials and become a Jedi Knight. At that point, they're able to take on an apprentice who will call them Master, even though they're not a Jedi Master. The Jedi Master is the next rank after Knight, and there's less of those. And, Grand Master is on top of the whole thing. And if you play the LEGO games, there's also another rank in between there, Jedi Council Master. That's one of the things you can get as part of the True Jedi bar. But I think, really, a Jedi who's on the Jedi Council is somewhat distinct from Master, because you can be a Jedi Master without being on the Council, as we all know. And the Council people, the decisions outrank others, but they're not necessarily an outranking Jedi. It's more like they have this role. Yes, Richard?
I know I asked at the beginning, am I a Padawan, but have we moved up at all since the beginning of this lecture?
I don't think you've done enough to count as the Jedi Trials, Richard. Maybe you need to ask more questions.
This is unheard of.
Yes, Richard.
What is the point of the initiate rank, and why do some people just get to skip it altogether?
I think the idea of the initiate rank is it's like they're kind of checking them out to see if they're good enough to become a Padawan, because if you're not attuned enough to the Force or don't have enough potential, you'll be moved out of the Jedi Order and into the Service Corps. So there's 4 branches of the Service Corps. I don't remember all of them, but there's the Agri Corps, where you use your limited Force abilities to help grow plants. And then there's other ones where they go around doing charity stuff or mediating disputes. But Agri Corps, I think, is probably the biggest one. And they're not really high tier Jedi, but they are Jedi enough to qualify for certain events that happen later. Cliff, did you have a question?
It was just would you consider me Padawan as well, or
I think you're all Padawans by this point.
At least I'm not a youngling.
Yeah.
It can be rough being a youngling. And okay, so we've skipped about 500 years here because not a lot happens during the Great Peace of the Republic, especially as far as the Star Wars are concerned. Darth Gravid is the Dark Lord of the Sith at this point, and he becomes inexplicably pulled to the light side and starts destroying a bunch of these things, Sith holocrons. Yes.
I was going to ask if he really looked like that.
No, there's no pictures of him, but he's best known for destroying a bunch of Sith knowledge and then getting killed by his apprentice for it, who continues the lineage of Sith. But things like this disappeared under his reign. And I think this is when the exact technique for essence transfer was lost. Sith didn't know how to do it after that point until it was rediscovered sometime around Darth Sidious. Yes, sir.
Why'd he do that?
He was inexplicably pulled to the light side of the Force, and so he was like, we gotta destroy all the Sith knowledge.
Okay.
That's all they say, really. It's just, it set him back a long time. They probably would have taken over a lot sooner if not for this. And then we skip another few hundred years, and if you remember episode 1, Yoda says, only two there. One master, one apprentice. After they talk about, how Darth Maul was killed. How did he know that? I thought the Sith were a secret and Darth Bane wasn't telling everybody. Well, he wasn't, but Keep Jean was a dark side cultist who was kind of like a minion for the Sith. And at some point he got captured by the Jedi in an unrelated thing, and he revealed this knowledge. Now, the Jedi didn't really believe him that the Sith still existed, but the fact that if they did, there would only be 2 of them was, I guess, kind of a piece of knowledge that Yoda kept around.
Which one of those 2 is Keep Jean?
Neither of them. These are just 2 Sith of the Bane lineage that are not named. I think this is probably an illustration from the Book of Sith, which is a little manual that you can get. I own it, but I didn't bring it. Yes.
At this point, Yoda is already alive, right?
Yeah.
He's 700 years old or something?
Yeah, Yoda would have been born sometime before Gravid here.
Okay.
At one point, my PowerPoint had it, but then I was like, this can't all just be in this year, this character was born. It would be too much. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he's been doing stuff. He's around.
Do you think Yoda's the one who told him to break all the holocrons?
I mean, maybe. I don't think any of the actual Sith Lords had encountered a Jedi by that point, at least not openly. Remember, they're acting in the shadows, so some of them have interacted with Jedi, they just didn't realize.
Did Yoda have his baby yet?
There's no baby Yoda in the Legends continuity. There's only 3 members of Yoda's species that we know about, and that's Yoda and Yaddle. And then back in the Knights of the Old Republic, there's Master, I think it's Vrook, but I could be wrong about which one he is. He's another Yoda. Every Yoda we've ever seen is extremely strong in the Force, including Baby Yoda in The Mandalorian. And their species name has never been revealed. And if you buy a bunch of the toys and look at their feet, they have an inconsistent number of toes. Did you have a question?
I was thinking Vrook is the old man. No.
Okay, maybe it's Vandar?
I think that's it.
Okay, Master Vandar is the Yoda of the Old Republic era. So now we get to about 100 years before the Battle of Yavin. This is when Dooku is training and becoming a Jedi. There's a lady named Anya Kuro, later called the Dark Woman, which I think probably is a Japanese film. She's Ki-Adi-Mundi's master, and she's kind of like a comic book thing where she will like cause minor mischief later. I'm pretty sure Darth Vader ends up killing her, but she's not dark side, but she's like kind of dark side. She's still affiliated with the Jedi, but she doesn't really do what they want. But she's not like, she doesn't join the Sith or anything. This is also when this ship, the Dowager Queen, crashes, and that's where Mos Eisley Spaceport is built around that crashed ship. And in this era is when Palpatine is born on the planet of Naboo to his dad. I forget his name, but it's some. I should have written it down. Something
Sheev Senior.
No, well, see, in Legends we don't know his name is Sheev. He goes by his clan name Palpatine because he doesn't like his parents and he doesn't like the name they picked for him. But we don't get to know what it is.
Palpatine's not his real last name?
Palpatine's his real last name, but we don't know what his first name is.
Where did Sheev come from?
Sheev came in, I think, one of the Count Dooku books after the Disney acquisition.
Oh.
I didn't realize it's that recent.
Oh,
Yeah, it was... That, like, it became a meme for a while because nobody knew his name, and I'm like, oh, it's Sheev. That's dumb. I don't think it's that dumb, but... I mean, I guess he'll always kind of be Sheev to me.
Yeah, that's the name they thought was dumb.
Alright, in 67 BBY, this is the start of the Darth Plagueis novel. Darth Plagueis kills his master, Darth Tenebris, who's one of those guys, usually known as musicians in cantinas. This one was the Dark Lord of the Sith. He used his big Bith brain to try and calculate when the Jedi would fall and stuff, but he wasn't normal, as Sithy as some of the other ones. Richard?
Could he play an instrument, though?
I don't think he could. I'm sure he could if he wanted to. Because he's got all that Bith mathematical, scientific knowledge. Yes, that's why they're good at instruments, is because they have such big brains. Yes, Cliff?
I think Tenebris, isn't that a word for, like, musical? Like,
I think it means, like, shadowy.
okay. Like tenor makes me think of, like, a tenor.
Before he was a Sith, was he Enebris?
I don't think we know what his name was before he became a Sith.
Is this when they stopped putting just a letter in front of their real name to make Sith names?
Yeah, it would have been around here. I mean, Darth Bane had a different name before that. Darth Xana, his apprentice, her name was originally just Xana. She just put Darth in front of it. She didn't even change the letter. So it's kind of whatever, Sometimes it'll represent them being reborn or some aspect of them. Sometimes it's just themselves, or add an M to it. This is also when the Mandalorian Civil War happens, which is one of the big points of departure from the Clone Wars cartoon. In the comics, I think this one's called Jango Fett Open Seasons. It was split between, there was the Death Watch, who are kind of just like, go out and do whatever, rape and pillage kind of thing, and then there's a group called the True Mandalorians, who were led by Jasker Muriel, where this symbol on Boba Fett's armor comes from. They're still militarized. They're not pacifists, but they're more like honorable warrior types. And so like Jango Fett and Boba Fett and like the people who train the clones all kind of came from this group. And let's see. But these conflicts will continue with the Mandalorian Civil War. Between 70 and 40 BBY, this is when Jabba goes to Tatooine. His full name is Jabba Desilogic Tiur. I think he goes to Tatooine to kind of try and wrest power away from Gardula the Hutt, who I believe I'll have a picture of later. Jorsk Bayoff, who's a Jedi Master in this era and becomes personal advisor to Senator Palpatine, who's working his way up the ranks. And Anakin Skywalker is born to Shmi at this point. Now, this is, if we turn back just a little bit slightly, because I don't think... Okay, yeah, this is a pretty big era. Let me just... Yeah. Okay, so around this time, and at about, like, I think 10 years before Anakin was born, Palpatine had been apprenticed to Plagueis for a while. And Darth Plagueis had actually found out that his master, Darth Tenebris, had another Sith apprentice, kind of the same thing like a backup, named Darth Venemus, another Biff. And Plagueis found him, captured him, and kept him in a stasis pod where he would do Sith science experiments on him and like test his midi-chlorians and stuff. And so him and Palpatine, in doing this, were trying to do the whole, like, try to discover the secret to immortality that is being talked about when Sidious is talking to Anakin in Episode 3. And he's like, he could save others from dying. That's what they did there, was they would repeatedly kill Venemus and bring him back to life. And after they did that, they like did a big like push on the Force itself to try and make it more towards the dark side. And the Force struck back by creating Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One. So that was in response to that. Yes, Cliff.
So Anakin was actually made by the Force.
Yes.
Like the way I had heard it was more that it was more so like a direct intention by Palpatine and Tenebris.
So in the Darth Vader comics, they talk about like Palpatine and Plagueis like sort of created Anakin directly with their experimentation. But that's in the Disney continuity.
I see.
In the Darth Plagueis novel, where they talk about this happening in the Legends, it's more like they were experimenting with the Force, but Anakin was an unintended side effect. Like the Force kind of slapping back against the Sith, kind of pushing too far. In 44 BBY, we have the Battle of Galadran, which was this whole huge political fiasco where a bunch of Jedi end up fighting with Mandalorians on, I think, Concord Dawn. But like they weren't supposed to be. Like they thought they were Death Watch, but they were actually true Mandalorians, and they were like defending themselves. Like neither side really would have been fighting each other if they knew what was going on, but they had been manipulated into this kind of by the Sith. And it turns out that a lot of Jedi died and a lot of Mandalorians died. One of them, Jango Fett, was able to kill a bunch of Jedi barehanded at this point, and he was one of the few survivors. And on the Jedi side, one of the few survivors was Count Dooku, who saw this. He was like, this guy's really good at killing Jedi. And Palpatine was like, this guy's really good at killing Jedi. I wonder if we made a bunch of him if they could kill the Jedi. Also, at this time, we have the Stark Hyperspace War, named after Eako Stark, who was like this pirate guy. He led a bunch of ne'er-do-wells against the Republic. It's called a war, but it's not really a galactic conflict. It's like a minor thing. But it did have largish consequences, because this brought several different key players into power based on like how they handled the conflict and how they became allies with each other. This is what brought Plo Koon into the Jedi Council. His master got killed. Finis Valorum did really well in like negotiating it, and he ended up coming to the top. And actually, Newt Gunray as well. This began his career because he actually worked with the Jedi and the Republic to put an end to this. And so the next time there was like an election within the Trade Federation, he did really well. And this also brought, who would later be known as Grand Moff Tarkin, Wilhuff Tarkin, his cousin became a big pal with the Valorans, so that got the Tarkin family into politics. Again, this conflict was also engineered by the Sith to kind of create instability and also like, hey, the Republic doesn't have an army and all these bad things keep happening. We need an army. In 42 BBY, okay, here's what I was talking about before, where Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious are messing with the Force. The Force kind of hits them back by creating Anakin. They don't realize this at the time, but what they were able to do was sort of tip the balance of the scales in favor of the dark side with that experiment and with their sort of later meditation. And this is kind of when the Jedi in the prequels talk about how their judgment is clouded, and like there's some dark side stuff going on and we can't see the future as well as we used to be able to. That's a result of this action. The same action that the equal and opposite was creating Anakin.
I have a Palpatine question.
Sure.
Was he a Jedi before he was a Sith? And if he was, why did Yoda not recognize him?
So he was never a Jedi. He was a Naboo politician born into royalty, and he was always kind of evil, and he had just a natural Force talent that he instinctively suppressed. But he knew that he had it, and even without any like knowledge from the Sith or anything, he was able to do Force lightning just because of how evil he was. So when Darth Plagueis came there, Darth Plagueis, by the way, is a moon of the Banking Clan people. So Sandhill, who we see in Attack of the Clones, is actually one of his like corporate disciples, not a Sith disciple. But under his guise as Higo Damask, he was actually a very wealthy moon in the Banking Clan, and he would go and do stuff on Naboo. So Naboo has all these natural deposits of plasma somehow that they mine. That's what they're doing in Episode 1 with those big tubes. Anyways, that was the reason that the Banking Clan was interested in Naboo. And he came across Palpatine and realized that there's something up about this kid. And they started talking, and Palpatine was just very ruthless, and he's like, I hate my parents. They're always getting in my way. And he's like, well, could you file for legal emancipation? And Palpatine's like, we don't have that here. He's like, are there any other ways you could become heir to the to the Palpatine family and in charge of it? And very heavily hints that he should kill his family, which he does, with Force lightning without having been trained in the dark side. So it really took to his role extremely well. And so throughout this time, we have a very powerful economic force in the form of Darth Plagueis, and we have a rising political star in the form of Darth Sidious. So these guys are like, yeah, we're gonna rule the Republic, take over the Jedi, and just live forever. We'll be the two. I'll be the power kind of behind the throne, and Sidious, you'll be like the Chancellor, and you're gonna sort of run things openly. And they had quite the partnership. They were able to get a lot accomplished. Also in 33 BBY, we have another uprising instigated by those same two Sith. I don't know if it's planet Yinchori, but the Yinchori are these little reptilian guys down at the bottom. They were attacking the Jedi. This was mostly a plan by Sidious to see if these guys would be suitable to be cloned a bunch and used for the clone army, because they already had the idea that was going to happen. They just wanted to find an appropriate species. And these guys were good at killing Jedi, but they were a little too unpredictable. They wouldn't work as a regular army. Yes.
It's the long neck character. Is that like the same people who live on Kamino?
No, that's Yariel Poof. And I don't remember his species name, but he's not a Kaminoan. They're just two different long-necked guys out there. We see some of these guys. Also notice that in the prequel era, some of the Jedi had red lightsabers. Those would have been red natural crystals, and because there had been no Sith for 1,000 years, it wasn't really like a taboo thing necessarily. Also, because when some of these comics came out, it was around the time of Episode 1, or even slightly before, and by that point, Darth Vader was the only Sith who ever had a red lightsaber, and Palpatine never used a lightsaber in the original, so it wasn't like established in the fan base that red meant Sith by that point. In 32 BBY, Darth Plagueis, who had been injured in an assassin attempt by a rival economic gang, and that's why he's wearing that mask. He approaches Jedi Master Sifo Dyas with an offer. Sifo Dyas had realized that all this stuff was going on and that the Republic would need an army. He's like, dark things are happening. He didn't tell him he was behind it, of course, but the Republic's going to need an army. I'm an extremely rich banking clan guy. Would you like to go to the Kaminoans and buy the clone army? Which answers a question that I always had watching the movie. It's like, well, these clones could not have been cheap. And if the Republic didn't pay for it, who did? It was Darth Plagueis. This brings us into Episode 1 of The Phantom Menace. A lot of important things happen here. So we start out with having that dispute over taxation in the free trade area, which makes the Trade Federation upset. And so they retaliate by invading Naboo. Of course, this whole thing is being orchestrated by Palpatine, who by this point has been secretly raising Darth Maul. Actually, Plagueis knew about Darth Maul, but he was like, he's just an assassin, we can use him. He trained him to be very good at a lightsaber and not so good at the Force kind of thing. During the scene where we see those two together, Darth Plagueis is actually just a little bit off-screen watching them with the macro binoculars. It's like, he called him Master. I wonder if he's planning to betray me. Nah. So yeah, Plagueis is actually alive during Episode 1.
What?
Yeah. So let's see. In the panel there, we can see on Tatooine, things have... Jabba the Hutt has come into power. The little smaller hut on his left is actually Gardulla the Hutt, who was the original owner of Anakin and Shmi before they were sold to Watto. And he's kind of become head honcho there. We can see his... I think that's Bib Fortuna. No, that's the guy that was before Bib Fortuna over there. Anyways, so, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, they're sent to Naboo to help mediate this dispute. They get Padme, sneak her out through the blockade so she can come to Coruscant to plead her case. Yes?
Why is there a different Bib Fortuna?
He may be Bib Fortuna, but I happen to know that at some point Jabba's Major Domo was killed and Bib Fortuna went into that position. And I think that was later. So I'm thinking this may just be a similar looking guy. Or maybe he had a falling out but somehow survived and then worked his way back into power. I should know that, but I don't.
Okay.
So, they're trying to... Let's see. Of course they end up stuck on Tatooine for a while, where they meet Anakin, and he has this wonderful pod race. They discover all of his strength in the Force, his latent abilities, and Darth Maul reveals himself and fights against Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon Jinn realizes right away and thinks it's a Sith Lord, but other people are like, maybe it's just some Jedi who fell to the dark side and doesn't really know that much, or maybe it's some other... There's a lot of other weird dark side cults throughout the galaxy who aren't the Sith. Yes?
Why does the Council not keep, a complete list of, Jedi who have been trained, and so they can be like, oh, this was this guy's, and this guy's like Apprentice or something like that changed.
So there is a list somewhere, but the thing is with Star Wars is that networking is kind of like honestly behind where we are today on Earth. You'll notice like when the planet Kamino was erased from the Jedi archives, one Jedi was able to do that, and there was no like I couldn't just go walk into Google Maps headquarters and make them erase a city. And even if I did, there'd still be MapQuest and Apple Maps and all these other things. Like knowledge is very centralized and kind of manual in Star Wars, and I think part of that has to do with there's no cybersecurity. You know, any R2 unit can just plug into something, and whatever that circuit is attached to, they can control. So things in Star Wars tend to be like manually separated and air-gapped. Like, this computer will control this thing and nothing else. And I can't remotely control anything. And if I want to change the steering, I have to go to the bridge. That's all, I think, because, like, the ability to hack is so much stronger than the ability to defend.
So what you're saying is that the archives are incomplete and you need to go to Dex's Diner to get the information.
That's right. See, some guy just knew that, and it wasn't in the Library of Congress, basically. So as a result of that, like, if they wanted to find a list of every Jedi, they'd probably have to, like, scroll through it manually. And maybe they have Control F, I'm not sure. But anyways, as a result of this Naboo conflict where, as a result of them being blockaded, there's no food coming in, and a lot of the Naboo are dying, and of course, the Gungans are getting all Gungan. In fact, Padme becoming an ally with the Naboo and doing so well during it was completely unexpected by Palpatine. He thought that this would have ended a lot sooner, and that the Jedi maybe the Jedi would have escaped and maybe they wouldn't have, but he did not expect her to forge an alliance with the Gungans. That was totally outside the scope of his plan. But regardless, he was able to kind of play both sides and use this conflict to be like, well, Chancellor Valorum has accomplished nothing with all of this. I'll be able to send out a task force. You know, we need a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum's leadership. And that was a process that took a couple of weeks. It seems like it's like an hour and a half maybe in the movie, but it was spread out, you know, between when the call for no confidence and then they picked some people that were, you know, possible candidates, and then they had a vote. And when it became clear that through their maneuvering he was going to win the vote and tomorrow he was going to become Supreme Chancellor, him and Darth Plagueis were talking about it. And, you know, Palpatine's going over his speech. He's like, you know, we could tweak this and tweak that, and I need to, you know, mention you and how helpful of an ally you've been. He's like, oh, well, don't mention this and that. And, you know, they're going back and forth, and they're, you know, drinking Corellian wine the whole time to celebrate. And slowly, Darth Plagueis gets more and more drunk and sleepy. And then Palpatine just blasts him with Force lightning, which, of course, he's wearing that respirator, so he can't breathe as a result of that. And Palpatine takes the time to, like, give a, like, 5-minute closing speech about how he's been playing him the whole time, and I was never as weak as you thought I was, and a lot of the things that you thought your idea were actually my idea, and I've been planning this the whole time. You were never going to rule by my side. I was always going to be the only Sith, and all that stuff. And here we have a smug picture of Palpatine slightly after having done the deed. He's got his lightsaber out. I assume when the picture was painted, it was assumed that he did use his lightsaber, but in the book, he does not. He just blasts him with Force lightning. And so it's the night before he becomes Supreme Chancellor in that scene in Episode 1 that Darth Plagueis is killed. Up to that point, he was there. Darth Plagueis saw Anakin Skywalker from a distance. And curiously, he could not sense anything from him. So whether that was his judgment was being clouded, or like the Force was kind of protecting it from him, or something, but maybe he was just so dark he couldn't see that wonderful bundle of light that Anakin was. And that gets us through the Phantom Menace. Alright, so now in this kind of period between episodes 1 and 2, there's a planet called Zonoma Sikat, which the Yuuzhan Vong have arrived on. Now it's it's beyond the Outer Rim, it's in the unknown regions, so they have reached there, but they can't really get to the main galaxy, because as we talked about before, there's kind of that barrier in hyperspace, they don't know how to get there. A Jedi turned Sith turned whatever bird creature named Vergir ends up finding her way to that planet where the Vong have kind of set up their base of operations. And they think she's from that planet. She realizes kind of like, these guys are no good, and I don't want them to know about the Republic, so I'll just pretend I'm from out here. She was on some mission or something. And so she's like, yeah, my powers come from this planet. And basically keeps them there as like, so they can study her and work with her. And she just is kind of stringing them along and delaying their invasion. Because she knows that these guys are quite resistant to being like the Force on them. And there's a lot of them, and they mean no good. But for now, they're just kind of being sequestered in this area. In 27 BBY, we have the events of the book and the project of the same name, Outbound Flight. So Outbound Flight had different points to different people. The Senate basically wanted to expand and explore. The Jedi wanted to send some Jedi on it so that they could maybe train chapters of Jedi and maybe even another galaxy if they want. The whole idea was it's Outbound Flight because it's a bunch of Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers around a big central thing, and it's going to be flying through a tour of the Outer Rim and then outside the galaxy to wherever they end up. No coming back kind of thing. And so there was going to be 6 Jedi Masters on board, and as a result of that, Palpatine's like, that's a good way to get rid of 6 Jedi Masters before any of this other stuff. So he had planned on having the Trade Federation ships actually blow this thing up, pretend they thought it was something else and just like blow it up in the unknown regions. But the Chiss, which is a very isolationist group out there, you may know of Grand Admiral Thrawn, he was among them, and he was in charge of the Chiss defense fleet. As they came close to it, he realized that something was going on, and he actually defended that ship from the Trade Federation, so they were able to survive. Around that time, Anakin and Obi-Wan actually got out as well, because Palpatine, as soon as he heard that the Council was adding Anakin and Obi-Wan, he realized that they needed to get off of there, because he's been scouting Anakin to be his apprentice this whole time. He doesn't want him flying off to another galaxy or getting blown up by the Trade Federation. And that guy with the hand outstretched, that's Joruus C'baoth, his old friend of Palpatine, and he starts to go mad with power as he's mostly alone on the ship with all these other Jedi. So he starts imposing strict rules and calling himself like the Supreme Commander and stuff, and slowly turning to the dark side. So there's all these different plans involving the Outbound Flight project, and Thrawn also has an interest in this because he sees and knows, and Palpatine also sees and knows, that the Yuuzhan Vong are out there on their planet, and if this ship comes by them, they're going to realize that there's other living beings in this galaxy and maybe be able to backtrace kind of where it came from. So they reach an agreement, and basically Anakin and Obi-Wan get off, they were called onto some other Jedi duty, and then the Outbound Flight project is sent a different way, and then eventually Palpatine is able to get his way, and the ship crashes, and it crashes in Chiss space, where Grand Admiral Thrawn has access to the bodies of some of the Jedi, particularly Joruus C'baoth, who becomes well preserved, and he will be back later.
Is it Thrawn already a Grand Admiral of the Chiss Ascendancy at this point?
I don't remember the exact rankings in the Chiss Ascendancy. I don't think they use the term Grand Admiral, because when he's Grand Admiral, it's for the Empire.
Right.
But of course, this is kind of when they connect and when Palpatine is aware of him. And I don't remember exactly when he joins the Empire, but it becomes... Basically, Thrawn joins the Empire because he knows also that the Vong are going to be a threat, and he thinks the Empire is going to be better able to defend the galaxy than just the Chiss on their own. 22 BBY, the outbreak of the Clone Wars. A lot of important things happen here. I hope you like the picture I picked of Anakin Padme. So, the movie starts out with Padme arriving onto Coruscant. She wants to defeat the Military Creation Act. Of course, unbeknownst to her and everyone else, the military has already been created 10 years ago on the orders of Sifo Dyas, but this would just make such a thing legal, even though it's already occurred. There's plans by Nute Gunray to kill her. Nute Gunray, of course, acting on the orders of, I think, Count Dooku, who's acting on the orders of Palpatine. And, of course, Nute Gunray hires Jango Fett, who hires the Changeling, who hires the droid, who hires the bugs to kill Padme. So it's a whole thing. And part of it is, there needs to be a threat on Padme's life so she and Anakin can retreat together to the world of Naboo and the most romantic vacation destinations. That's all kind of falling squarely within Palpatine's plan there. Also, most likely Palpatine was behind the Sand People stealing Anakin's mom. They'll raid, but they don't normally take prisoners, so the fact that they did is a little bit sus. And he probably wanted that to happen. And of course, on Geonosis, the droid foundries are piling up, and Count Dooku, who has been the apprentice to Palpatine for some time now, actually, shortly after Episode 1, they had a conversation, those two. And Palpatine was like, so are you mad at the Sith Lord for, Darth Maul killing your former apprentice Qui-Gon Jinn? And Count Dooku was like, a little bit I was at first, but actually I think these Sith have some good ideas. I want to meet them. So it was only shortly after that he became his apprentice. Of course, he was always kind of a temporary one. Palpatine always had his eyes on Anakin. So this is, of course, when Obi-Wan, discovers the clone army being grown on Naboo, and Count Dooku is sort of fomenting the Separatist rebellion, and that officially kicks off the Clone Wars on Geonosis in the year of 22 BBY. Let's talk a little bit about the clone army. Of course, you've got your basic clones, and they have different colors and things on them. You've got your red for like a captain and the yellow for a commander, and they have different colored outfits. Later in Phase 2, as we get more towards Episode 3, the colors will be more personalized. They may have more to do with like what division they're in. But at the start, every clone has the basic white, and then the colors solely signify rank. There's also 2 other types of clones in addition to the basic ones. You've got the Republic Commandos, who operate in squads of 4, pictured on the bottom left, and you have the Advanced Recon Commandos, also known as ARC Troopers. Captain Fordo there is there on the bottom right. And the ARCs were trained by Mandalorians, such as Cal Skirata in bottom middle, both in Mandalorian culture and in ways of fighting. And of course the ARCs, especially a group of them called the Null ARCs, have a lot less genetic modification with them compared to the regular clones. They're more pure Jango, in a sense. And of course, the Grand Army of the Republic includes Jedi in it, and all of the Jedi are officers, even Padawans, and ones who haven't really done any military commanding before, which led to some problems, because the way Jedi fight and the way clones fight are pretty different. So early on in the war, there was a lot of casualties, with Jedi really not knowing how to command others in battle. And we've got the droid army. Here we have the classes in the classic Battlefront 2. But, of course, you've got the regular B-1 battle droids. You've got the B-2 super battle droids and the droidecas. Then you've got all these other sort of mech-type ones, like the snail tank and the hailfire and the spider droid and the dwarf spider droid. A lot of those ones were actually in existence before the war, used by, like, the Commerce Guild and the banking clan to collect debts. Basically, a hailfire droid would roll up if you were late on your payments and scare you into paying. And then in the bottom middle, that is a ultra battle droid, which has a couple extra blasters on it, and I think it maybe have Cortosis armor on it. They're meant to be able to be pretty good against Jedi, and I think they are. They have flamethrowers as well, which a flamethrower, good anti-Jedi weapon, because you can't really block it with the lightsaber.
So, I was just curious if there was like a stated reason why, in expanded material, why Jedi were made like the default commandos. Like, if that was maybe a plan on Palpatine's part to get the Jedi like more into war and like the dark side and all that, maybe?
Probably, because remember, for Palpatine, every dead Jedi is good. Mm-hmm. So it's even before Order 66, every Jedi casualty to a droid is also part of his plan. And every Jedi who's like upset because their clones just got killed and they can sort of sense what's happening through the Force, that's also good for him. So, I mean, that's also why they're fighting droids, but their allies are clones who are living beings who the Jedi can sense. So there's kind of that aspect to it as well. And I think the Republic, from their perspective, is just like, well, the Jedi are the best people. They can kind of sense the future. Of course they're going to be the commanders of the army. And this is the first army that the Republic's had in a long time. Of course, all the outline systems have their own armies, and some of the bigger companies with seats on the Senate, like the Trade Federation, have their armies too. And 25 BBY, one of the more pivotal battles in the Clone Wars, the Battle of Jabin, was another kind of like Duxon during the Mandalorian Wars, where a lot of Jedi were killed, a lot of clones were killed. It was just one of the long, grueling matches. Now's a good time to talk about the different types of lightsaber combat. There are 7 recognized forms. Form 1 of Sheet Show is the basic one that all the Padawans learn, where you're training against like the remote robot thingies, the little balls. Form 2 is Makashi. It's a more duelist type form. Count Dooku is the big proponent of that one with his curved lightsaber. Although you don't have to have a curved lightsaber for this form, but apparently it's better for it. Form 3 is what Episode 1 Obi-Wan Kenobi used, Episode 3 Obi-Wan Kenobi used. It's more defensive. It's good against blocking. It's the negotiator's style. 4 is the one where you're jumping around and bouncing off the walls. That's Yoda. That's also Episode 1 Obi-Wan. 5 also is Xian, also known as Gem So. That's the one that Anakin and later Luke used, where it's about strong, powerful strikes. They're maybe a little bit slower. Niman, there's no known users of it that I could find that are like important Jedi in the movies. But an offshoot of that technique is the one where you use 2 lightsabers. So Anakin does a little bit of that in Episode 2, and of course, like Asajj Ventress. Yes.
Would you say Ahsoka uses that sort of, or no?
I think she has a different one technically. I think she uses Form 4, but like there's aspects of this built into it. They all kind of blend. and Jedi will be like focus in one and then bring in stuff from other ones. And then Form 7 is the best lightsaber form. It's the most like it's supposed to be the best for winning duels, and it's like the most unpredictable and powerful and stuff. And it's known as Juyo or Bapad. It's what Mace Windu and Emperor Palpatine do. And if you see in their duel, I think it would be hard to argue that theirs is not the most skilled. Alright, contingency orders in the Grand Army of the Republic. This was a very big change that the Clone Wars cartoon made. In the Clone Wars cartoon, Order 66 is related to a brain chip put in all of the clones. Which, I guess it almost came to light a few times, but when you've got multiple millions of clones running around, each of them carrying physical evidence of the conspiracy, you'd think somebody would have found it out. In the books prior to that, the idea was that there's a bunch of oh crap orders that, for when things go wrong. And there was like 150 of them. 66 is just one of those. So there's different things. Like Order 4 is if the Supreme Chancellor is incapacitated, it goes to the Vice Chair of the Senate. Order 5 is if Supreme Chancellor is unfit to issue orders, the Chief of the Defense Staff assumes command. 37, we don't have the exact wording for it, but it's to capture a particular person. Order 65 is a fun one because that's the one where the Grand Army of the Republic, aka the clones, detain the Supreme Chancellor using deadly force if necessary. So I think like the Senate can order that one, and who can do what is different. It's kind of like declaring your captain unfit for command. Order 66 though is your loophole because the Supreme Chancellor is the one that gets to order that one, or the Senate, and that's the one to kill all the Jedi because they've been in a conspiracy. So the idea was like if you had asked a Jedi about Order 66, if he had read the manual, he'd know what it was, but there's 149 other ones for all sorts of situations. It wouldn't really stick out to him. Types of cloning. We of course know the Kaminoan cloning, where they have growth acceleration that grows the clones at 2 times rate, but there's also a different type of cloning, which is faster and less reliable, known as Sparti cloning. And those ones are grown in a single year, but the end result is less good, I guess. It's more variable. There's going to be more genetic defects in there. Towards the end of the war, there was a lot of Sparti clones being made, both to replace the rapid numbers that were dying in like the Outer Rim sieges and stuff, and also to become the first generation of stormtroopers. Because the Jango clones, the really good ones, their purpose was to kill the Jedi, as far as Palpatine is concerned. So a lot of them are going to die executing Order 66, and we need a bunch of fast, easy clones to replace them, and they don't need to be that good because we won't be fighting a war anymore. Can you clone Jedi? A lot of times, a lot of things that involve that will say no, but there's a lot of instances of clone Jedi, so it can be done. Maybe it's just a little tricky to do so. Obviously, there was a clone of Starkiller in The Force Unleashed 2. In Star Wars Battlefront Elite Squadron, there was 2 clones of Jedi. They weren't even like Jango Fett clones, they were just Jedi clones who were in the army. Of course, we've got Luke Skywalker and Jorus C'baoth, and I think this one's name is Dorsk 82. This 82nd of the Dorsk. So I think it takes a little bit of trickery to make it happen. The Force doesn't like 2 individuals that are the same kind of existing. So to grow the 2 bottom ones with the double U's in their name, Luke and Jorus, they were actually grown in an area that was protected from the Force using a Force bubble creating species known as Yasala Miri. And in the case of Starkiller, if you've played The Force Unleashed 2, you'll know that there's a bunch of like messed up, disgusting versions of him, and he was the only one that turned out right. So I think what it goes to show is it's not impossible to clone Jedi, but it is quite tricky. We can also talk here about the original vision for the Clone Wars. In Episode 4, when Obi-Wan brings it up, he just mentions that him and Anakin were veterans in the Clone Wars, and that's about it. Basically, based on some of the really old books that came out around that time, like the original Thrawn trilogy and some of the other stuff, like the old like Marvel comics, probably the Clone Wars took place 10 to 20 years earlier than it ended up taking place. Like that original idea was that it was further in the past. And of course the big thing was that everyone thought that there was different groups of clones, each controlled by a different clone master who were attacking the Republic. They weren't the troopers for the Republic, they were being attacked by evil clones of different things. And I just like this picture. It's in one of the older concept arts for Star Wars. And if you've seen Star Wars Rebels, you'll see where the design for the purple Wookiee, whatever species he is, Zeb, comes from. So training the clone army, the regular basic clones were just sort of trained with, just hired guys. But all of the commando units were trained by pretty much Mandalorians or other bounty hunters. And they were trained in Mandalorian culture as well. So some of them took on clan names even as they were fighting, and some of them actually knew the song that the towns made about the volcano exploding all the way back on like slide 3, which is kind of fun. I think it's Da Huerta Verda, which is in Mandoa, the Mandalorian language. Also, if you played Star Wars Republic Commando, the like main menu song is also a Mandalorian word chant. Vote on, brothers all. 19.5 BBY. This is when Episode 3 takes place. In the Tartakovsky 2003 Clone Wars cartoon, we can see that this is when General Grievous grabbed Emperor Palpatine and snuck out. So the way that they were able to invade was, of course, through that sort of secret hyperspace lane that I talked about. Of course, that was furnished to them by Darth Sidious so that this exact thing could happen. And we have one of the biggest battles of the Clone Wars, the Battle of Coruscant. There was a lot of ships there because you have the Coruscant Home Defense Fleet, and then also, not pictured in the movie, there was a bunch of early prototype, they're called Victory-class Star Destroyers, which were slightly smaller than the ISD-1, the Imperial Star Destroyer. It's a little bit squatter, but it looks very, very similar. And so those are coming in, and there's a bunch of droid ships coming in, all to capture the Supreme Chancellor. And of course, Anakin and Obi-Wan make their way there. Anakin kills Count Dooku and starts to really slide towards the dark side because he didn't want to do it, but also he would do it. Yes.
Do you think Count Dooku was a good guy?
I don't think he deserved necessarily what happened to him, but he did some pretty bad things. Count Dooku was in the words of like a K-pop person, he was a Sith stan for a while. He sought out the Sith and joined them on purpose. But he also, I think, did want to sort of protect the Republic, even if he thought turning it into an empire was the best idea, best way to do that. He certainly wasn't as obviously evil as Darth Sidious was, and he was genuinely surprised when this turn of events happened on the bridge of the Invisible Hand. Which, by the way, the Invisible Hand, another one of George Lucas's kind of obvious political leanings, the Invisible Hand being a term for the free market economy. Other ones that you may know about is that Newt Gunray's name is based on two characters that George Lucas was not a big fan of in real life, that being Newt Gingrich, the radio commentator, and Ronald Reagan. You swap around Reagan and you get Gunray.
Oh.
So this brings us to the end of the Clone Wars, pretty much, you know. General Grievous is killed by Obi-Wan Kenobi on Utapau, and Anakin starts his very rapid descent into the dark side as he gets more and more worried about the death of Padme. I'm not sure if the dreams that he was having, the nightmares, were sent by Darth Sidious, but they probably were. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's why he was having those nightmares about Padme dying in childbirth. Or possibly if he was the one that caused her to, quote-unquote, die because she had lost the will to live. That may have been just a long-range thing by Sidious. And so Sidious declares himself after the death of the Jedi, as he reformulates everything into the First Galactic Empire, which by this point in the presentation you'll know is a bald-faced lie. It was by no means the First Galactic Empire. Also, when he talks about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, you'll know by this point now that he calls it a Sith legend. Well, I feel like a legend has to have been told to you by someone else. You can't have been there to see it, and you can't have never told it to anyone before. But he calls it a legend. I don't think it counts as one.
It wasn't even 10 years old at that point, was it?
No, Anakin was alive for that. What kind of legend is that? But Padme, before she dies, does give birth to Anakin's twins, Luke and Leia. Also, that bald, creepy woman on the bottom right next to Palpatine is named Sly Moore. And when we see about people that are theorized to be Palpatine's secret children, she's usually considered as the mom in those theories, or is definitely involved with him in some way. Around this time, with Order 66 happening, there were a lot of Jedi who survived. One of them was named Asharad Het, and he basically becomes a sand person to go undercover, and for whatever reason, I think he goes into stasis for a while, but he survives a very long time. Not just through the Jedi Purge, but just like time-wise. Yes?
You mentioned earlier that there was a big event where a lot of Jedi died and it caused the survivors to turn to the dark side by the tragedy. Was there something similar with Order 66?
Well, I know a lot of the survivors of Order 66 did get taken in by Darth Vader to join his Inquisitors, which were a thing that existed in the old canon, and probably the trauma of what they had seen made it easier for that to happen. I don't think any of them just turned instantly, but remember, this was happening spread out through the galaxy. a lot of the Jedi, he didn't want them able to team up and form a defense against the clones. It was like you've got one master and one Jedi apprentice leading a battalion of troopers on some faraway world. So they're not like super concentrated like that other event where it was all in one planet.
I wasn't sure because Yoda mentioned that when it was happening that he could feel it.
Yeah, he definitely could. I think if all the Jedi had been on one planet, it would have caused another tear in the Force or whatever. But this was more spread out. I thought I saw another question.
Going off of what Andrew said about Jedi Survivor, is this around the same time that I think this is around the same time that the main character for
Cal Kestis?
Yeah, Cal Kestis gets his thing. I was gonna say, does he like show up at all in like any of the like sort of outside cans, or they just started in with the
No, so he started with the games. Some of the more recent books in the new canon may involve him. I'm not totally sure. It'll come up in the canon lecture when it eventually happens. But yeah, Cal Kestis is a new name.
Where's Kyle Katarn?
So I believe Kyle Katarn's dad was one of the Jedi, maybe a Padawan who survived this, but I don't think he's born yet. In fact, as far as surviving Jedi, I have a full list here.
So small?
Yeah, it's small and very blurry, but as we can see, Yoda is the only Grand Master, but there's a lot of Jedi Masters, a lot of Jedi Knights. Actually, more, probably if you like had a proper survey of everybody, there would have been more Padawans that survived. But frankly, based on who's known and been brought up in stories, we actually have a lot of Jedi Knights who survived. Now, some of these specifically survived Order 66. Some of these are like a technicality because they like ended up in stasis for 1,000 years or whatever. Some of those survived by turning to the dark side, and you can see that even some service corps members survived.
I was about to ask, like, based on the service corps, like, did Palpatine really have to go after them? They were not a threat.
They had a little bit of force, so anyone who had any possible way of challenging his power got Order 66. or were scouted out to become, like, dark apprentices or whatever, because Palpatine did not care about the rule of two at this point. As far as Palpatine was concerned, he was going to be the last Sith and he would rule forever. He had all these, he was trying to figure out how to be immortal, and he didn't consider himself bound by any rules, Sith or otherwise. So he just made a bunch of apprentices or like dark adepts or whatever all over the place. But yeah, the Jedi Service Corps were decimated. A lot of the other like Force religions throughout the galaxy also, like the Barando Sages, which are Plo Koon's people, I think they were targeted as well. A lot of different groups were. Not just the Jedi. Because anyone that could possibly pose a threat had to be dealt with. In 19 BBY, if you remember that girl that went into a stasis pod wearing the Muir Talisman, this is when she wakes up again. Darth Vader finds her somewhere. Zane, that's the name of that Jedi I couldn't remember. Basically, she ends up surviving. There's a little bit of a fight with Darth Vader. I think this is one of the times Luke fights him in the comics that aren't in the movies. But she gets left on a deserted desert moon with a bunch of Rakghouls, not really causing anybody any harm. But she is awake now.
Wait, you're telling me Darth Vader found this woman who has a talisman that can control an army of Rakghouls, and he said, "Yeah, we're cool. I'll just leave you here and go on my way."
I think they fought, and I guess he just let her go. I didn't read this part of the comic, so all the things involving the Muir Talisman are part of, it's called Star Wars Vector. And so there's like different comics that are covering different eras, and this storyline was like made simultaneously in all of them because it involves this person who's kind of quote unquote time traveling by means of stasis. Mm-hmm. So I haven't read the full thing of it, but I think he's not a fan of her, but he also realizes that the talisman is a little too dangerous for him to mess with, and she ends up just getting left alone and not killed by Darth Vader, which is kind of crazy because she is a Jedi. Because during this time, Darth Vader is going around hunting and killing down a lot of the Jedi. Speaking of killing the Jedi, Darth Vader took a secret apprentice named Starkiller to help him do that. So this is the Force Unleashed. Let me take a drink of water here. During Order 66, when Darth Vader went to Kashyyyk, he found a Jedi Knight who had been kind of retired and had a kid, and he ended up taking the kid and training him on his own, using him as sort of this apprentice to go around and try and kill off different Jedi, like we have Kazdan Paraz and there's Shaak Ti down there. And also as kind of an insurance policy to try and take out the Emperor one day. And as soon as the Emperor finds out about this, he blasts Starkiller outside of the ship, where he is salvaged by Darth Vader and kind of brought back again. This time, nobody knows he's alive except Darth Vader, and he says, you're going to form a rebel alliance so we can get all the Emperor's enemies together in one place. and you are going to use that to distract him while we kill him. Also, the whole thing was the Emperor's plan because he wanted all his enemies in one place so he could just kill them all at once. But by sacrificing himself, Starkiller, aka Galen Merrick, is able to defend the rebellion and allow them to escape from the trap that they had found their way into. His family crest is what later is known as the Alliance Starbird. So there we have the symbol of hope she's referring to is actually Starkiller's family's logo. And down at the bottom we have the formation of the Rebel Alliance on Corellia. You can see Mon Mothma there, and Bail Organa, and a few other people that he had gathered together as part of this plan. That was actually the Emperor's plan originally.
This might be just me misremembering, but what was the Jedi Exile's canon name again?
Mitra Surik.
Surik, okay. Thought Merrick might have been...
And that name only was made up for the Darth Revan novel, because up till that point it was just called the Exile, but they needed a name for this character who was going to be in the book.
Gotcha.
So this was also part of Palpatine's plan. It seems like the large majority of events are, aside from the Gungans taking part in that war, was the only thing you've mentioned so far that he did not foresee. Is there anything else up to this point, or maybe you'll point out later that he did not foresee that wasn't part of his plan, even if it's something that didn't break his plan altogether?
I mean, he didn't foresee the birth of Anakin. He didn't, the Force did that on its own. He had no idea. And when they found Anakin, he was surprised. But of course, he implemented that into his plan. So it's always hard to tell what's something he's, plotted out in advance versus what he's able to spin to his thing because, he's been a politician for 50 years, so he's really good at doing that. But I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's, really obvious, but I think those are kind of the main ones. The fact that the Rebel Alliance was formed on the Emperor's orders, I think, is probably the biggest one. And that's just a cool scene from The Force Unleashed where Star Destroyer is crashing and he uses the Force to sort of bring it down earlier in its trajectory so it doesn't crash directly into him. We can now talk about the different the differences in the Force Unleashed different platforms. Actually, I have a notebook that has it written down in there. I forgot to bring that up.
Well, the first one is that last scene. That's not in the Wii version. It's not the version I played.
So which versions have you all played?
I played the Wii one, both of them.
I played 360.
Yeah, 360 version.
I played the Wii when I was a kid and the 360 3 years ago with you.
Okay. So the 360 version was kind of the prime main version of the game. It did have extra DLC, like an alternate ending. When you got the dark side, you could play and murder Obi-Wan Kenobi and stuff. However, Nar Shaddaa, which was supposed to be a level, ended up being cut, and you end up finding Rom Kota on Cloud City instead of Nar Shaddaa. Now, the Wii version was outsourced to another studio and was kind of like the second version of the game. It was pretty different. The first level of Kashyyyk, you actually play at night, versus it's in the daytime. So these things were kind of parallel development, so they had the same script, but a lot of details were different. Let's see, there's 500 First Order Stormtroopers there instead of regular ones. Of course, the other big difference with the Wii is you have the waggle motion controls, you're just kind of shaking around. There's worse graphics, obviously. The story was the same, although there was a Nar Shaddaa level, and there was a couple levels in the Wii version that were DLC for the Xbox 360, so it was slightly more complete from a story perspective. And of course, the jumping around was a little bit floatier as well. So if you remember the Wii version, there was all those Jedi Temple missions, or kind of in between the main story, where you could get extra lightsaber crystals, and eventually you fight a hologram of Starkiller's dad. Those were downloadable content. I don't know if they were paid or free on the Xbox version, but they weren't originally part of the game. The PS2 port was actually ported from the Wii version.
PS2?
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't PS3?
No, this came out at the very end of the PS2's life cycle, where it overlapped with 360. And it was a port of the Wii version, so it was technically the same, but obviously they, added that second stick for camera, and you had buttons instead of having to shake your stick around. Yes.
Is there a PS3 version, or did they say, we're not going to wait for that?
I think The Force Unleashed 2 might have had a PS3 version, but I don't think this one did. It does have the Nar Shaddaa level. There's an extra Bespin level near the end of the game where you fight against a couple of Gungan crime bosses. Another difference is that in the Wii and PS2 version, when you fight the Emperor at the end, he has a lightsaber. And in the Xbox 360 version, the Emperor just has lightning and Force powers. He doesn't use the lightsaber. The PS2 and Wii also added a 1v1 local multiplayer duel mode where you could fight against each other, kind of like a fighting game. The PS2 is also what got ported to the Nintendo Switch recently. And that one, you're allowed to choose between the PS2 controls and the Wii controls. There's also the PlayStation Portable version, which is a complete port of the PS2 version with extra many bonus features. So even though the graphics are even worse due to being on a handheld, it is the most complete version of the game. There's an Order 66 mode where you can fight against increasingly intense waves of clone troopers, and there's also historic duels where you can be like, I'm going to be Luke that time he fought Darth Vader, or all these different things from the movies. Let's see. Those movie duels actually have rendered models doing the classic things from the cutscenes, so like all the flips that you remember from the movies are not cut from the movie, they're rendered in-engine, which is kind of cool, and it's possibly the best version. The DS version of the game was kind of scrunched down even further. It's not like the Xbox or the PS2 version in that it's not complete like the Wii, PS2, and PSP version, but it does have the Xbox levels with jagged graphics, so like a lot of the things that are different between the Xbox and the Wii, the DS actually matches the Xbox version for whatever reason. And it has touch controls instead of button controls. So there's like on the bottom screen, you can tap the different moves, like swing your lightsaber or jump. And then for like the different combo moves, you have to like swipe across multiple things at once. There's also a mobile port, which ended up on iOS and Android. And this had kind of what I would call touch draw controls. So a little bit like how you log into a phone by drawing a shake. It's kind of an auto runner where your character walks up and then when there's bad guys on the screen, it'll be like a V over this one shape. So you have to draw a V or like a star or whatever to make him attack them. And I think I actually had this on my iPod Touch. There was also a second mobile port for Nokia phones. It had like GBA type graphics. I believe that is all of the versions. Zero BBY, also Zero ABY, the Battle of Yavin, aka Episode 4, A New Hope. Luke is now a grown adult, moisture farming on Tatooine, and as a result of the Death Star plans being put into R2-D2 by Princess Leia, and them crashing down, he gets involved in this whole adventure, where he and quote-unquote Ben Kenobi, aka Obi-Wan Kenobi, even though he lives openly with the name Kenobi, and Kenobi is the name of one of the most famous Jedi Masters of all time, he never gets found out. Yeah, that's the thing. Anakin and Obi-Wan were like, in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, they were like heroes of the Republic. They were household names. Kids grew up wanting to be Anakin and Obi-Wan. And I guess it never made it out to Tatooine. They never figured it out. Yes?
Did people know all the other members of the council too, or just those two specifically very famous? No one was like, I want to be Jarl Poof.
Yeah, people might have wanted to be Yoda, but like Anakin and Obi-Wan were publicized. They were part of the Republic propaganda machine.
Okay.
And in fact, after Order 66, like the monuments and stuff would be like, and there was one Jedi, Anakin Skywalker, who was still loyal to the Emperor. He was a great guy, but he got betrayed and killed by the other Jedi. Because the people were just, they would not accept the idea that he was in on the conspiracy. They loved Anakin too much. And so, this is where the Death Star ends up blowing up Alderaan, although I think it should have blown up Nal Hutta, because the Hutts are they're disgusting. You should get rid of the Hutts. The Alderaanians did nothing wrong, but the Hutts absolutely did. And, this is also where the idea of stormtroopers not being able to hit anyone comes from, even though that was Grand Moff Tarkin's direct order, was to let them escape so that they could be tracked to the rebel base on Yavin 4. Yavin 4, remember, is a place where multiple Sith ghosts are hiding. But in the final battle, Luke is able to tap into the Force and hit the thermal exhaust port and blow up the Death Star. Now, question. Do you know where the trench is on the Death Star that they were flying on at the end?
It's not that center belt?
Yeah, it's not the equator.
It's not the equator.
It's towards that. I think there's like a dot that I can see of like a square going like. It's hard to show without pointing at it, but there's like a little square that's in the top right, like along that edge.
So it's up here,
okay.
Right above the dish.
Gotcha.
So the equatorial trench is actually where the docking bays are. So like when the Millennium Falcon comes in, that's where it goes into park. And they actually show this in the movie when they're like going over the Death Star plans, and it's like an extremely old computer graphic. They actually show it turning and then zooming in above this. So the exhaust port is actually right above the super laser, and they're flying north to south in the trench run. which is just a fun fact because a lot of people, understandably, think that it's part of this big equatorial trench, which is one of the 2 features on the sphere that you can actually see from a distance, which makes perfect sense. Now we can talk about the Tarkin Doctrine, which is the reason for the Death Star. Grand Moff Tarkin by this point is like, okay, we're not fighting a galactic war anymore, and we're not like cloning bajillions of clone troopers to impose our will. We need some way to keep the systems in line, but we also have to be somewhat evil, so we're going to scare them. So the point of the Death Star is it would blow up one planet and then hopefully never have to blow up a planet again. Everyone would just be too scared to like mess around with the Empire with the fact that this could occur. Now, different people in the Empire had different ideas about this. Grand Admiral Thrawn, for instance, thought it was very wasteful. We have a fleet of Star Destroyers that are perfectly capable of wiping all the life off of the surface of a planet by just shooting lasers at it a lot. So why do we need to completely destroy a planet and all its resources? And of course, you're putting all your eggs in one basket, so it only takes one plucky Jedi and a starfighter to take it down. But it wouldn't have super mattered because, you can keep making more Death Stars as long as the Empire exists. And also there's the theory that the Death Star was part of Palpatine's plan against the Yuuzhan Vong, because they have really big, what are called world ships, that carry a lot of fighters and people inside them, and the Death Star would have been really good against those. Because they're still on their way to invade. Okay, so Celeste Morn, the Rakghoul girl, is back again, and now Luke and Leia have found her, and so this is the same year as the Death Star being blown up. They're fighting each other. And the talisman actually unclenches from her neck and clutches onto Princess Leia, so she finally has her mind back for the first time in like 1,500 years or whatever, and is able to think clearly. And she realizes, though, that it's not really worth it to have someone else be kind of burdened by this, and so she actually takes it back. But because her mind was able to like sort of resurface, this time she's more in control, and instead of like going on a Rakghoul rampage or whatever, she decides to blow up a Star Destroyer so Luke can escape, and just kind of tour the outer edges of the galaxy. Later she realizes the reason she wants to tour the outer edges of the galaxy isn't just because she's finally free, but also because of the influence of the talisman, who also wants to be free. There is a difference between the Imperial Army and the Stormtrooper Corps. So that is a cartoon on the left of General Maximilian Veers. You may remember from Episode 5 as commanding the AT-AT Walkers. He is in the Imperial Army uniform, and they're like the standard troops throughout the galaxy. The Stormtroopers are supposed to be the elite shock troopers, and the reason we see them all the time, and the Imperial Army never in the movies, is because the rebels are always hitting really important spots where the sort of, not commandos, but like the more important troopers are. But this has led to the idea that like stormtroopers are the main thing of the Empire and they're just everywhere. No, if you got to be a stormtrooper, you're actually like doing really well in your military career. Yes.
Oh, never mind. I was about to ask why stormtroopers were on Tatooine, but they were specifically ordered there.
They were looking for the plans to the Death Star.
Right, yeah.
And tracking down a rogue Imperial senator, Princess Leia. Also, by this point, they are not volunteers, they're conscripts. But they're human conscripts, they're not cloned people. By this point, the Sparti clones have kind of run their course. They were the first generation of stormtroopers, but now these are all basically pressed into service.
So they only allow humans to join the Empire?
Yes.
Okay.
And this kind of plays on the whole anti-alien stuff that goes all the way back to the Pius Dea Crusades. But even, remember, in the Clone Wars, all of these separatists who were committing all these atrocities all the time, they were entirely aliens, with the exception of Count Dooku. And on the Republic side, you've got the clone troopers, they're brave, and they're humans defending the Republic. So that was another thing that Emperor Palpatine was playing on, was you've got kind of the speciesism between the core worlds that are more human-dominated and the aliens in the Outer Rim.
Admiral Thrawn was close enough?
He's considered a near-human, but even then, the fact that he was a Grand Admiral was like something that other admirals talked about and like looked down on him for. He was such a good commander that Palpatine let it slide. But yeah, there was absolutely other people in the army that were like disgusted to have to work under him or near him. So yeah, stormtroopers were only humans. And so under the Empire, that really kind of takes off with the speciesism. The human-centric nature of the Empire. And yeah, so we already kind of talked about this. The stormtroopers are more standardized, more like the Phase 1 troopers in terms of their outfits. If they have colors, it usually signifies rank or like what type of trooper they are. Whereas in the later years of the Clone Wars, there was like painting stuff for like personal things, or like how many droids he killed. And there was a lot more variation in the clones. We can also talk now about the lineage of the TIE fighters. The original part of the design of the TIE Fighter actually starts with the Jedi Interceptor that we see in Episode 3. You'll notice that front window there is very similar to a TIE, and then the wings that fold out actually have a similar vertical thing. Rafe Sienar, who's the owner of Sienar Fleet Systems, who invented the TIEs, also was involved in Darth Maul's scimitar, that sort of Sith assassin ship with all the cloaking abilities. The main original TIE was called the TIE LN. That's the one with the regular hexagonal wings that we see in the middle. And the next prototype was kind of the base to iterate other stuff off of was the TIE Advanced X1 in the bottom right, which is actually Darth Vader's ship in A New Hope. But there weren't very many of those made because that was kind of the platform to test other ideas. But you'll see that the curved wing and the sort of broad bar that stretches backward does make its way into some of the other later designs. So on the left we have the TIE Bombers, which look very similar to the Advanced X1, except they have the two pods, and below that is actually the TIE Shuttle. So in the TIE Bomber, the second pod is filled with bombs, and in the Shuttle, the second pod is filled with troopers or dignitaries. In the top middle, we have the TIE Interceptor, which is better than the TIE Fighter in almost every way, and had the war stretched out longer, probably would have completely replaced the TIE Fighter. It's a lot faster, and during the time when both existed, it was all the pilots that flew those were aces. You had to, I think, do 10 combat missions in a TIE LM to be able to qualify as a TIE Interceptor pilot, which, given the fact that these things have no shielding, is quite a feat. So, like the Trade Federation before them, the Empire having so many people, and there was so many droids before, but they're more of the swarm tactics. Keep things running cheap, you actually have to wear a pressurized suit inside of a TIE Fighter because there's no life support system in that pod either, so if you took off your helmet inside, you would die, versus in a Rebel fighter, they had those open face helmets because the canopy is sealed and everything. So these are more about how many you can make, and they're fast and powerful, but they're not defensive.
Did the other fighters, like the X-Wing, all have shielding along with it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll actually get to the X-Wing next, but yeah, the X-Wings, the A-Wings, the Y-Wings, all of those have shielding and life support systems.
Okay.
So as a result, they were a little bit bulkier and slower and more expensive to produce. I think you can make 3 TIEs for the cost of an X-Wing. And the X-Wing was actually a design made for the Empire, but the engineers who made it didn't like the Empire, so they leaked it to the Rebels. Then we have the TIE Avenger on the top right. I think that one's only in video games. And in the bottom is the TIE Defender, which is the sole shielded TIE Fighter. And it actually has kind of plot armor, extra good shields or whatever. But there are not very many of those made, and they tend to be more popular after the fall of the Empire, when you have limited resources and you need to preserve the fighters you have versus just churning out a bunch more. And now we can talk about the X-Wing lineage. The first one that's kind of like an X-Wing type design is called the Z-95 Headhunter. It's on the left there. It's kind of a cheap old ship, even by the time of the Clone Wars, but it's like a Ford Mustang. It's kind of old reliable. And they get used well into the New Republic era, different versions of them. If you've played any Star Wars tabletop RPGs, and even some of the games, it'll show up in there. I think Jedi Academy, you fly one. Not that you get to fly it, but your character brings one to a place. Then during the Clone Wars, we have the ARC-170, which is a bit of an odd beast in that it has a rear-facing gun, which is a rarity among Star Wars ships, and 3 pilots to boot. But as you can see, that one kind of implements the S-foils. And then there's the classic T-65 X-Wing, and then much further in the future we get, I forget the number and the name of it, but those ones are called the Twin Tail, as you can see, because they have 2 tails. And the other thing that these have that TIE Fighters don't is a hyperdrive, which also makes it much more expensive, which is also why it has an astromech slot, so you can navigate through hyperspace. The TIE Fighters are totally dependent on being attached to another bigger ship to get them from place to place, which also discourages people defecting, because you're not going to be able to just fly off somewhere. You're kind of I can only go however many miles before I run out of fuel. You kind of have to stay with the group. Now, this is a good time to talk about the Death Troopers. So, where this zombie plague outbreak actually comes from originally is a Sith bioweapon. From all the way back in, I think it was in the books that were in the lead-in to the MMO. So, it's related somewhat to that, and that's what Red Harvest is about, which is a prequel to Death Troopers. But basically, this Sith zombie virus is rediscovered later by Darth Vader in the novel Death Troopers, and he gets basically has a secret Imperial group work on it because he wants to find a way to weaponize it. And of course it doesn't work. It ends up basically turning into a bunch of zombie stormtroopers that are running around killing everyone. That ship that is floating derelict in space full of zombies is no good. and it starts infecting other people that come into it. But some people do seem to be naturally immune, which is why it isn't like a world-ending threat. There's people that are just immune to this zombie virus, and from them, they're able to reverse engineer a vaccine for it.
So it's just a cure?
There's just a cure, yeah. Or I think the cure doesn't work if you've already been bitten, but it'll, like, if you take it when you haven't been bitten, you're now immune to being zombied. Like, they can just kill you the normal way at that point, and you won't turn into one. Which is why it managed to fit its way into a couple of small horror books and was never, like, a galactic threat. However, the way the virus behaves is kind of like a slimy goop that reanimates them, which may tie into a different thing from an older comic series called I don't know how to pronounce that. It's the MGGAL. There's a different kind of goopy creature that takes over people, and it's possible that the Sith virus implemented some of that species into it, because they seem to have some similarities. But I don't think those ones undeadified people. And the reason the Sith were making this also, in addition to being a virus, was to use as a weapon, was some of the Sith Lords thought that if they experimented with this, they could maybe find a way to live forever. If I could turn myself into a zombie and then somehow cure all the bad aspects of being a zombie, I would be an immortal Sith Lord. That didn't work. Let's talk about music genres now. We're in episode 4. So here we have a Bith musician. These ones are not Sith Lords, they're just musicians. Probably still really good at math and science, though, because look at how big their brains are. Some of the named music genres in Star Wars are Jats, which is considered to be an outdated form of music compared to Leap Jump, which is what all the kids are listening to. And then, of course, the classic Cantina Band song is in the jizz genre, but this is a swing style similar to Jats, both of them similar to jazz in real life. And you can see there's Aubad and Klitz, which are both offshoots of jizz.
Is George Lucas the one that came up with that name, or is it someone else who wrote like a comic?
It came up pretty early, and I think it would have been a book, not a comic, but oops. I don't think George himself came up with it.
That's
also,
disappointing.
A musician who plays jizz is called a jizz whaler. Tactics in the Galactic Civil War. The Empire, being this galactic entity, is having to police every system. And they've only got 25,000 Star Destroyers, so that makes them very vulnerable to hit-and-run tactics. And so that's what the Rebels do. Their ships all have hyperdrives. They swoop out of hyperspace, shoot some proton torpedoes, and then leave. And they're able to really keep up by doing that because the Rebels don't have this constant base of operations. They're not governing anything. So they can just hit installations and space stations and orbiting Star Destroyers and cause a lot of havoc that the Empire really can't deal with in time. And that is what allows them to start turning the tide of the war. The Empire is kind of being crushed under the weight of its own machine. In 2 ABY, Luke in this old comic and Leia come across the Kyber crystal and duel Darth Vader for it on the planet Mimban. You may know Kyber crystals as the regular lightsaber crystal from the Clone Wars, but in the original run of the comics, Kyber was this particular crystal that amplified your force powers, and other lightsaber crystals have different names, none of them being Kyber. 3 ABY, we have The Empire Strikes Back. So the Rebel base has relocated to Hoth after their place on Yavin 4 was found out, and the Emperor has tracked them there with probe droids. Luke finds his way to Master Yoda as he is sent there by Obi-Wan Kenobi's ghost and trains under him. Yoda rides on him like a little backpack as he does backflips and such. And of course there's this plan to try and draw Luke out of hiding because on the planet Bespin, also known as Cloud City, all of Luke's friends have been captured and Han Solo is frozen in carbonite to be paid off to Jabba the Hutt. Because if you remember from the first movie, Jabba the Hutt, money was owed to Jabba the Hutt by Han Solo. And so Luke goes there to free his friends. He fails to free Han, but he does get in a duel with Darth Vader where he loses his hand and learns that Darth Vader is his father. Him losing his hand is important because that has Skywalker genetic material in it.
I was about to say, is that just not like a genetic trait for the entire family?
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing about Jedi that because having like a replacement hand is so like easy, I guess. Like their medical technology is really good. Like you can actually feel stuff with those fingers, and like if it has synth flesh on top of it, you can't even really tell. Jedi have long considered it to be perfectly acceptable to disarm somebody by just chopping their hands off. They don't really think of that as a war crime or anything because it's so easy to fix. And right after this, pretty much 1 year later, Luke has realized that Darth Vader's his father, and he's training under Yoda. He's also going through Obi-Wan's old materials in his hut, where he finds designs for how to make a lightsaber, which is why Luke's Episode 6 lightsaber, which I don't have a close-up here. I guess you can kind of see the emitter down there. Looks a lot like Obi-Wan Kenobi's Episode 3 lightsaber. They've got that similar thing, and that's because he based his design on Obi-Wan's. The green crystal is... There's different stories told about that. There's a story that he found a way to make it synthetically and be green instead of red. And there's also the story that it is Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber crystal. I'm not sure which is which. I think most sources agree with the synthetic one, but I kind of like it being Qui-Gon's more. Anyway, so he makes that on Tatooine. He goes in and invades Jabba's palace to rescue his friends for real this time, including Princess Leia pretending to be the bounty hunter Zuckuss. They get him out of there. Boba Fett ends up in the Sarlacc pit for a little while.
Was Zuckuss a real bounty hunter, or was it Princess Leia's OC?
She was impersonating a known bounty hunter.
Okay.
I don't know what happened to the real Zuckuss. I don't know if she was killed or not, or maybe just elsewhere. But yeah, that was Jabba recognized him. And of course, Jabba the Hutt is killed here by Princess Leia. She wraps her chain around him and kills him, which is another dead Hutt, which is great. And there's a second Death Star, which is built mostly as bait, because at this point, Palpatine just wants Luke to join his side. He doesn't care too much about that. Of course, there's inner conflict within Darth Vader. In Episode 5, he's like, you and me can take out the Emperor together. We can kind of do our own rule of two thing. But by this one, Vader's like resigned to the fate that he just doesn't want the Emperor to kill his son in front of him. And so when Luke wins his lightsaber duel with Darth Vader and decides not to finish him off, and he's not going to fall to the dark side, the Emperor is like, well, time to die, and he blasts him, and Darth Vader picks him up and chucks him down the shaft, which goes all the way down to the reactor in the middle of the Death Star 2. Shortly before Lando Calrissian and Nien Nunba blow it up in the Millennium Falcon, because Han Solo is down on the surface taking out the shield generator. And, I guess losing the radar dish on the Falcon at that point. Palpatine here, he basically had two outcomes. Either Vader would kill Luke and just become even more evil and prove himself as a good servant, or Luke would kill Vader and probably after the psychological damage of that would follow the dark side and become himself. So that's why he's always trying to make Luke hate him during this. He's like, get at me, and then Vader will block the attack or whatever. And if he had managed to kill Palpatine at this point, Palpatine has enough backup plans that wouldn't have been a permanent issue. Because Palpatine does come back after this. And yeah, of course Darth Vader, having been chucked into lava on Mustafar by Obi-Wan Kenobi all the way back in Episode 3, has lost a lot of the living matter in his body. So in addition to being somewhat slower in the robot suit, he's also lost a lot of living matter, which has decreased his connection to the Force. He's not as strong as he could have been, which made Palpatine very upset. Also, the reason he has those buttons right on the front of his chest is kind of as an insurance policy for Palpatine, because if Vader ever tries anything a little bit sus, he can just blast him with lightning, and all of his life support systems will fail. Vader also suspects that parts of his suit are uncomfortable and like not up to spec on purpose, just to mess with him. But he ends up turning back to the light side at the end, saved by his son.
Yeah!
If you remember when Luke was in the Rancor pit, he picked up a skull and threw it at the button to escape. This is the story of the man whose skull it was, Bidlo Quirrell. So, Jabba the Hutt's previous major domo had been killed, and he was looking for a replacement. And Bidlo and Bib Fortuna found a crashed ship with a Rancor in it. And so they worked together to bring the Rancor to Jabba the Hutt as like a present and also like, see how cool we are. And Jabba's like, oh, thank you. One of you could be my major domo. The other one can have an even more prestigious position. And Bidlo's like, yeah, I want the more prestigious position. And so he threw him into the Rancor pit to be the first one to be eaten by the Rancor. But he got his revenge because Luke used his skull to kill that Rancor when the thing came down on him. There were several iterations of the Death Star. First with the Death Star prototype, of which there were a couple of those in the Maw installation, that area full of black holes. Obviously there was the Death Star 1 and the Death Star 2, which was bigger. There's also a quote-unquote Death Star 3, which takes place in the Star Tours Disneyland ride. It turns out to have not been an actual Death Star, but just like a facade that somebody built as a prank. But you do, I think, blow it up in that storyline of that ride. And then finally, the Hutts. got their grubby little hut hands on some of the designs for the super laser and basically took out all the rest of the space station and made just a super laser, which they called the Dark Saber. That also got blown up. Yes.
So was that ride canon?
I think it was, yeah.
Is it still canon?
No, it's Legends now. I don't even know if it still exists, if you can do it anymore. But, yeah, the Star Tours ride was, like, part of the story.
How does the Mandalorian hold the Darksaber? It's so big.
See, that's one of those things where the same name gets reused for different things.
I was just commenting on this. Yeah, the Star Tours is now new canon stuff because they all switched everything over.
So they're like doing different different events.
Yeah, it's entirely new scenarios in there now.
Okay. But yeah, even if it didn't have a super laser and wasn't really a weapon, the thing that you blow up in the original Star Tours was called the Death Star 3. So shortly after the death of the Emperor, the Empire as an entity still exists. It's a little bit leaderless, and it's breaking up into different factions, different warlords who are warring with each other and with the Rebel Alliance. But the war is far from won for the Rebels. And one of the guys that comes to power at this point is named Trioculus, named because he has 3 eyes. And he claims to be the illegitimate son of Emperor Palpatine by means of Sly Moore. And possibly some, like, genetic science. Because, I mean, look at him. Neither of them had 3 eyes. Apparently there was some dark side prophecy in these kids' novels. These came from a kid's book, so it doesn't need to make a whole lot of sense. There was a dark side prophecy that someone with 3 symmetrical eyes would make an excellent ruler for the Empire. And to legitimize his claim, he manages to find Darth Vader's glove, which has magic dark side powers. The other guy also claims to be a son of Palpatine. His name is Triclops. And although he doesn't have a very obvious third eye, he does actually have one right there. It's just like grown inside his skull. It's not functional, but it is a third eye. He ends up defecting to the Rebels after they're fighting this guy. But the Rebels end up taking care of both of them, and then he just kind of disappears away with his son, Prince Ken. His name is Prince Ken because I think the woman he married was a quote-unquote Jedi princess, which is a concept they never really explained very much.
Are you telling me both Triclops and Trioculus are from the same book and they're both sons of Palpatine?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Okay.
They have the same mother too, right?
I think they probably... It's unclear if they were like naturally born from Sly Moore or like maybe genetic science or whatever using Palpatine, but they... Yeah, so... the fact that there's 2 of them is like, I think part of the conflict of the book is like, this is the good one and he joins the rebels to help them take out the evil one.
To be clear as well, like, none of the Sly Moore stuff is actually, like, ever stated. It's just, like, that's the best candidate out of the options, right?
I think her name comes up at some point, like...
Okay.
Like, it's speculated in-universe by people. It's not just a fan thing.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Does Palpatine also have a third eye?
I don't think he does. But, you know, I've never seen below the neck of Palpatine, so he may have a third eye somewhere. Sly Moore would know. So we've got the Imperial Remnant. The one on the left is Yzan Isard. She, I believe, inherited a super Star Destroyer, and she had to be dealt with by the Rebels. This whole era is like very complicated politicking between the surviving Imperials as they vie for power. But eventually a bunch of them are called to a summit, where the one in the middle there, Natasi Dala, basically gasses all of the other ones to take command for herself. So her and Gilad Pelion are the 2 like surviving warlords that end up kind of coalescing the Imperial Remnant around themselves and return some degree of stability to Imperial space. By 4 ABY, Coruscant is recaptured and the New Republic is officially established. So there's still Imperial remnants out there fighting, but they're like every year they're getting more and more weaker, and the New Republic has got its own things to worry about. It kind of becomes the new galactic government, and some of the like less bad Imperials end up involved in it because you got to remember, Alderaan was a planet that a lot of people liked and was like in a pretty loyal Imperial world too. So there was a lot of people within the Empire that after Alderaan was blown up became extremely disillusioned with it, and even if they didn't defect to the Rebels, they were more than happy when this happened. In 5 ABY, we have the events of Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2. Here we have Kyle Katarn.
Yes!
And that's the live-action Kyle Katarn on the far left there, because this one had, like, what is it called? Full motion video?
Yeah.
So it has some of the most realistic things in it, despite being one of the oldest games. This is the sequel to just called Dark Forces, which is, you also play as Kyle Katarn in that one, but he's just like a stormtrooper or something, and it's just a regular shooter. He doesn't get to be a Jedi. It's a lot less cool. In this one, a Dark Jedi / one of Darth Vader's Inquisitors named Jarek has located, or is trying to locate, the Valley of the Jedi, which, if you remember all the way back, Rusan with the thought bomb, that's where that all was. He wants to absorb that power for himself. And so he's got, I don't have pictures of him, but he's got a motley crew of kind of disgusting guys that they're trying to get it and become ultimate all-powerful. And Kyle Katarn, after realizing that his dad was a Jedi, him and his girlfriend Jan Ors go on an adventure to try to stop them and succeed. And Kyle Katarn actually manages to kill Jarek and actually release all of the spirits that were trapped in the thought bomb in the Valley of the Jedi there. So it remains a Force Nexus with incredible Force powers. In fact, it can awaken the Force in people that didn't normally have it. But the thought bomb is finally gone, and the Jedi are at rest. Jarek is actually naturally blind. He's a Miralukan species. So if you remember Knights of the Old Republic 2, if you've ever seen that girl with the visor over her head, Visas Mar, he is the same species as her. Yes.
Her species was killed off, though, right? She was the only survivor?
Yeah, I guess she had babies.
Okay.
Or maybe there's some off-world at that point.
All right.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure he was not meant to be one when he was created, but they were like, oh, it's a blind Force user, and they retconned him into being the same kind of thing as her.
Gotcha.
And during this one, Kyle used a yellow lightsaber. And of course, there's been a lot of jokes and things. Kyle Katarn is kind of the Chuck Norris of the Star Wars universe. His feats are greatly exaggerated because he's so cool. This is one of the Imperial warlords that causes a lot of trouble for Luke and the gang. I just like how he looks. If you remember the isolationist matriarchal society of Hapes, they finally become relevant again, and they become allies with the New Republic. That's Prince somebody. I knew his name when I put this together, but I don't remember it anymore. And that is a Hapen Battle Dragon, which is one of their kind of unique starships that they have there. They look pretty cool. In 9 ABY, Grand Admiral Thrawn returns from the unknown regions with a fleet known as the Katana Fleet. Don't ask me how they know what a katana is in Star Wars. But they're a bunch of older Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers. They're not as good as Star Destroyers. They're much, 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 much smaller. But he has 10 to 20 of them. And with that and his tactical command, he's able to cause a lot of problems. He also has used Sparti cloning technology to clone copies of Joruus C'baoth, who becomes Joruus C'baoth, and Luke Skywalker, the evil clone of Luke being Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker is cloned from the hand of Luke that was chopped off in Cloud City, which is also, I think, why he has the blue lightsaber there.
How does this relate to bigger Luke?
Well, there's the theory that in Episode 4, A New Hope, in some scenes, Luke seems to be taller relative to the scenery and other actors than in other scenes. And so some people have said that there's a bigger Luke secretly. Other people have counterclaimed that due to the Iran oil crisis at the time, Luke was malnourished and shrunk. But probably it's just the fact that they had different props and not everything was identically scaled. How Thrawn was able to clone these Jedi without them going insane, even though they went kind of insane, was he grew them inside of a bubble created by the Ysalamiri, which repel the Force. So he was able to clone them and grow them in 6 months without them going totally insane from clone madness, because the interference of the Force on their developing minds was removed. His second in command was Gilad Pellaeon, which is one of those guys who survived the gassing earlier. And then also in this story is where Mara Jade comes in. She was one of a group called the Emperor's Hand, which were secret assassins that worked for the Emperor, and they had a little bit of the Force. And the last thing she heard from the Emperor was, as he was falling down the pit, he sent out a psychic command to her saying, "Find and kill Luke Skywalker." So that's what she tries to do, but they end up working together eventually, and slowly they fall in love, and she later becomes his wife.
Oh.
But Luke Skywalker is killed, and Joruus C'baoth is killed, and Princess Leia ends up figuring out that the Empire was responsible for the devastation of the Nogri homeworld, and the Nogri are a species of little guys, kind of reptile-like, that Thrawn was using as bodyguards, and once they realized the Empire was responsible for their ecological destruction, they just stabbed him in the chest. And so, despite his tactical genius, he completely overlooked that his own bodyguards had been compromised. There's a famous scene in the book where Dros Gabaev tries to blast him with Force Lightning, and he happily just absorbs it because of the bubble protected by his little salamander thing. And I really like this rendition of it. In 10 to 11 ABY, almost immediately after the Thrawn campaign ended, it turns out the Emperor is actually back. He's been alive for a while. He's been recovering in the core, in the deep core world of Biss. And he has a fleet of new types of ships. He has world devastators, which are these big machines that'll go to a planet and suck up all the natural resources and print out a bunch of droids and stuff. And so he's back in a clone body. Basically what he does is he grew a bunch of clones of himself that were kept on ice, and then whenever he dies, he essence transfers across the galaxy into one of those clones and takes it over. Now, the clones being clones are like genetically not as good as his original, so they do age faster, and with the incredible power of the dark side corrupting him, it made him all wrinkly. It grows the clones older and older, faster and faster. So each time he switches, he has less time to exist as that clone.
So do the clones look like him after he gets wrinkly in the fight with Mace Windu, or do they look like old Sheev?
They originally look like that one, like young, smooth Sheev.
Okay.
But, like, at one point, Luke finds his way there and has a duel with one fresh out of the clone tank, all, like, covered in goop and naked. And, like, by the end of that fight, he's old and wrinkly again, because the incredible power of his dark side energy is just rapidly aging him all the time.
Okay.
So, like, it's the best he can manage, and it is working, because as long as he doesn't run out of clones, he could just keep doing that, although the process of dying and, like, possessing the clone of yourself is very painful. Him and Luke are both very powerful in the Force by this point. On the left there, that is called a Force Storm. Palpatine can just kind of do it, and it destroys starships. And actually, he's able to, all the way from Biss, make a Force Storm that rips open a hole in hyperspace, and opens a portal for Luke to basically just walk there from Coruscant. So, like, pretty cool. Guys are very OP in this. He also has a new type of Star Destroyer with a super laser built down the middle of it. Not as good as the Death Star, but still, like, really good. Anyways, the way this ends up being defeated is that he's looking for a new host, and he finds Anakin Solo, which is the third child of Han and Leia. So they've had 3 children now: Jason Solo, Jaina Solo, and Anakin Solo.
So they've been busy since.
Yeah, I mean, it's been 10 years. I mean, it's been
like 6 years.
Yeah. They've been busy. And of course, by this point, Leia is starting to be trained as a Jedi also by Luke. However, that guy, the little ball man, Epotujaios Brand, when Palpatine goes to try and possess Anakin, he leaps in the way, and he had already been damaged during a prior duel, so he was already dying, so he trapped the Emperor's spirit in his own dying body and dragged him down into the underworld with him as he died, which ended Palpatine once and for all, and Anakin Solo was safe. Yes.
What's C-3PO doing there?
He's taking care of the baby.
Okay.
I think Han and Leia were off dealing with the Galaxy Gun at this point, which was another Imperial superweapon that basically just shot a large bullet through hyperspace that would blow up places. So, if he figured out where you were, he would just blow up your planet from a long distance. So that's another regular gun. Yes.
How many galactic super weapons are there?
A lot. We haven't even reached the end of them in this. Yeah. One of the kind of consequences of the Death Star is happening was that a lot of the stuff that takes place after Endor in the sort of earlier expanded universe, they just kind of kept bringing up that same plot point of there's some Imperial superweapon they have to destroy. So Luke now, with the Emperor gone and all that, sets up his Jedi Academy, his Jedi Praxeum on Yavin 4. Here you can see some of the first class of Padawans or whatever. However, remember, the spirit of Exar Kun is in one of those, so he ends up possessing... I think Kip Duran. Yeah, Kip Duran kills a lot of people before ridding himself of the spirit. But it takes basically all of the Jedi under Luke's command to finally put the kibosh on Exar Kun after however many millions of years. Also around this time is the Sun Crusher superweapon, which is that thingy there on the left. The Sun Crusher is actually only the size of a regular starfighter, but what it has is super torpedoes in it that will, if you shoot them at a star, will cause resonance within the star's core and cause the thing to explode and destroy a whole solar system. So that's another thing that they have to deal with. Yes.
Is Kyle Katarn helping him at this point?
Yeah, he's teaching at the Jedi Praxeum.
Hell yeah.
Every so often he'll get close to the dark side or scared by something and he'll be like, I quit being a Jedi. And then that's usually between video games. And then at the start of the next video game, he's like, I need to be a Jedi again. So he'll go off to the Valley of the Jedi to reawaken his fourth powers and then be a Jedi again. And so the Sun Crusher, I think, was one of the super weapons being worked on at the Maw, and then Natasi Dala is back in charge of the Empire at this point.
Oh, there he is.
So yeah, this is the story of Jedi Outcast, and actually that's exactly what happens is, after a while of not being a Jedi, he goes back to the Valley of the Jedi after, like, I think the first couple missions of the game to get his Force powers back. And that's why in the middle of Jedi Outcast there's that mission where he has a lightsaber and you gotta, like, train with it. Because he's relearning the Force after he's already been a Jedi and stopped being a Jedi once. So Gillet Pelion is in charge of the Imperial Remnant, which ends the infighting within the Imperials are pretty much all under him now. And in this story, Dasan, who's that dinosaur, and his apprentice Tavion Aximus try to create a splinter faction called the Empire Reborn. And their whole thing is they want to make these troopers that are basically just regular guys with a crystal on their chest, and then basically have them walk through the Valley of the Jedi and turn themselves into Force-using soldiers for them, which is why they have lightsabers, and you have to fight a bunch of those things. Kyle Katarn nearly falls to the dark side in this one when Tavion and Dasan seemingly kill Jan Ors, but it turns out that she actually survived that, and that was just a ploy, and he was fine. And she was fine. And he was also didn't become a Sith. In 14 ABY, we have the sequel to Jedi Outcast, which is Jedi Academy. Here we have Tavion again, because she survived even though her lizard man didn't. And she has found the Scepter of Ragnos. So if you remember Marka Ragnos, that Sith ghost from the first part of this, he is basically, this was his staff, and she has this idea that if she goes around to important galactic areas and sucks up Force energy in it, she can bring back the spirit of Marka Ragnos, and they can rule. That is exactly how it works. So she goes to a place like Biss, where the Emperor had come back to life a bunch of times, and like all these other important areas, and sucks up Force energy from it. And of course, Rosh Pennon, this guy, the friend from the Jedi Academy, who's annoying right at the beginning.
Friend?
Well,
no.
You tolerate him. Like, your character's so much nicer to him.
He tries to kill you.
Not immediately. But yeah, he falls to the dark side and joins Tavion. It's super annoying. And, there's a light side and a dark side ending to Jedi Academy. And in the dark side ending, you do get to kill Rosh, so maybe that makes that one the
yeah, you
one.
do.
So that may be the one time it's worth it, right? But this also is one of the few places where it ties actually into the MMO, or rather the MMO tied into it, because the mission that takes place on Chandrilla is a tomb of some old Jedi, and I believe that tomb is retconned to be the Consular class from the Old Republic MMO. Like, that character story, when your Jedi Consular eventually dies, that'll be their tomb. So that does kind of connect to that. But, Rosh is stopped, the thing is destroyed, the final level is on Korriban, which is really cool. You get to fight a bunch of Dark Jedi and Sith wannabes, and you get to finish off Marka Ragnos, who's been a ghost for a very long time now. We can now talk about the Dark Forces series. The first one, as I said, was an FPS, which is Star Wars Dark Forces. Then we have Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, where you first get a lightsaber. Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, and then Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy. However, if we follow the naming convention, we will see that since Jedi Knight is a sequel to Dark Forces, and Jedi Outcast is a sequel to Jedi Knight, and Jedi Academy is technically Jedi Outcast 2, the full name of that game should be Star Wars Dark Forces 4, Jedi Knight 3, Jedi Outcast 2, Jedi Academy. Yes.
I guess, since we've already gone past it quite a bit, does The Force Unleashed 2 take place immediately after the first one?
It's like a year later. And I didn't include it because almost nothing of consequence to the wider galaxy happens.
Okay.
Darth Vader makes a clone of Starkiller, who is like, am I really him, or am I just a clone? And he goes around, he finds his old crew, and then basically ends up back on Kamino after like a week, where he was cloned at, and ends up fighting Darth Vader, and then I think he gets killed by Boba Fett or something. Or like, I think he's alive at the end, but like...
There's like two different endings.
Yeah, there's different endings. I think in the light side ending also is Darth Vader ends up in custody of the rebels, but that's never followed up on. Obviously he escaped from that because we would have heard about it. But like, he doesn't start a new rebel alliance or blow up anything important. He just leaves a secret cloning facility, runs around, like fights a Rancor or two, comes back to the secret cloning facility and destroys it. So it's a very self-contained story. And there was never a third game, so nothing it's set up actually leads anywhere.
Okay.
In 19 ABY, the Galactic Civil War, which is, the rebels and the Empire, finally ends. with the Pelion Gaversum Treaty. Now, since the human there is Gilad Pelion, I can only imagine that the Birdman is something Gaversum. I guess he's in charge of the New Republic. I probably should have looked up more about him. But as you can see, Mon Mothma, that old bird, is still kicking as well. Between 20 and 22 ABY, Luke Skywalker marries Mara Jade, starting the Skywalker family. And Jason, Jaina, and Anakin Solo join the Jedi Praxium on Yavin 4, and they meet a girl who's also a Jedi named Tahiri Vela. And she shows up a few times. She's notable not only for the role she plays in the story, but for the fact that the authors go out of the way to mention the fact that she never wears shoes. Make it that what you will. 25 ABY, the Yuuzhan Vong finally attack, and we start the New Jedi Order era. If you read the New Jedi Order books, there's like 19 of them or whatever, they're talking about all of this stuff. So the Vong come in, they've got all these biological weapons, and they pretty much blitz over the galaxy. It's kind of like a repeat of the Mandalorian Wars in that the Jedi are slow to intervene, and as a result, like, the death toll of this war, as you can see, is 365 trillion, including Chewbacca and Anakin Solo. It's an extremely, extremely destructive war, the worst that the galaxy has ever had. And Tahiri ends up being involved in this because she can kind of communicate with the Vong, and they end up realizing that the home planet of Zonoma Sikat is like a religiously important world to them. So that's where the New Republic invades to attack.
How could they do that to Lumpy? Leave him fatherless.
Yeah, I mean, and they didn't die at the same time either. I'm pretty sure Chewbacca died trying to protect the Solo kids, and then Anakin later beefed it anyway. Also, the thing that kills Chewbacca is a moon falling on him. One of the things that the Yuuzhan Vong have are like gravity well projectors, so they can like yank moons out of orbit or something. Jason Solo also is imprisoned by the Vong for a while, which starts his slow fall into insanity that takes place over a while. And Ben Skywalker, the son of Luke and Mara, is born. So you'll note in the new canon that Ben Solo is Kylo Ren, but in the original story, Ben Skywalker was the son of Luke and Mara, which makes a little more sense because Luke actually knew Ben Kenobi, as opposed to Leia, who only ever knew him as Obi-Wan, and Han, who knew him as Ben for like a day. And Jason Solo is kind of like the Kylo Ren type person in this. So there are some differences between the old and the new Jedi Order. The most obvious is the fact that Luke's Jedi Order is able to take in people of any age who want to be a Jedi, and they're also allowed to get married. That caused problems for Anakin, but it could also be the fact that it was the hiding it that was trouble for Anakin. So, and really those rules were only really established around the Ruusan Reformation. Prior to that, in the Old Republic, like, Jedi could get married, it was frowned on, but it wasn't like a rule, and it was only as the Order, sort of in the absence of the Sith, were worried more about themselves and came up with the more strict rules. And in Luke's era, especially since there's so few Jedi to start with, he relaxes a lot of those. So the Yuuzhan Vong, in their home galaxy that they came from, because they came from a different galaxy, which they basically wiped out and then started invading other ones, due to an incident that happened with them, they eschew like any sort of droids. Droids are abhorrent to them, any AI or even most like metal type technology. All of their stuff is biological. So as you can see here, he has a snake that spits acid. But they've got all sorts of different things. They have spaceships that are like living beings, and they have big Star Destroyer type things that are living beings. They have even the gravity well projectors that crushed a moon on Chewbacca was a living thing. So that's their whole thing, is they have like living technology, and they're somewhat not immune, but they're resistant to force powers being used on them. That thing on the left is not a Terminator, even though it looks like a Terminator. It is a YVH-1 Yuuzhan Vong Hunter 1 droid, which was basically designed by Lando Calrissian with the intent of killing the Yuuzhan Vong because they hate droids. So why not make a really good assassin droid that scares them and looks like a skeleton? And so later after the war, they end up being used as like mining and protocol droids and stuff, but they look so ridiculous, I don't know how they ever could. In 28 ABY, this is in the middle of the Yuuzhan Vong War, the GFFA, Galactic Federation of Free Alliances, is formed. This is basically the Hapes Consortium, the New Republic, and the Imperial Remnant, and the Chiss, basically all band together to form a galactic government and present a united front against the Yuuzhan Vong. Also of note is that the acronym for the Galactic Federation of Free Alliances is GFFA, which is often how people will abbreviate the Star Wars universe as the Galaxy Far, Far Away. That was probably done on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is like the main government from
That's pretty clever.
In 29 ABY, with the help of Tahiri Vela, the peace treaty is signed on Zonoma Sikat, ending the Yuuzhan Vong War, and they're finally able to establish communications with them. The Vong are kind of exiled, and later on they will even be a little bit sorry about what they did. They kind of are taught to love and realize that, invading and killing things aren't everything. They can start to use their living technology for terraforming and such to try and make up for what they did. Yes.
Isn't that like an insanely huge change of character for them? Since their entire society is based on pain and suffering.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Did Ronka Lee sing at them? What happened?
So I think part of it was that they didn't really understand what the Force was, and they also had been turned into this really angry militaristic society because of what happened at their home galaxy. They hadn't experienced being nice for a very long time. So it was kind of a Ronka Lee type thing, I guess. But as soon as they turned around pretty quick after they surrendered, because their planet was in danger and they really liked that one. That was Tahiri's big insight, was that this is where their homeworld is and it's sacred to them. So if we invade there, we'll probably just win the war. And so they end up cleaning up. They end up also winning a big war on Coruscant, which ends up right next to that planet because it can travel through hyperspace. And it is kind of a big... You'd have to read the end of the New Jedi Order series of books probably to get the full story of why they ended up changing. But I think even now there's no named Yuuzhan Vong who are this one became a scientist. There's all of them, and then there's the Hive Queen or whatever. And Jacen Solo ends up kind of distancing himself from the Jedi at this point to go around the galaxy and learn different Force techniques, learn from different Force traditions, light side enclaves and dark side cults, and things that aren't just the Jedi. And along the way, he ends up meeting Vergir, that weird bird alien who was imprisoned with the Yuuzhan Vong, who was a Darksider. And he also meets... we'll see that later. Anyways, 35 ABY, we have the Swarm War with the Killik Hive Mind and the Dark Nest Crisis. Both of those are bug type, and that's because there's a bunch of bugs that have a hive mind, and a bunch of people end up joining them, including Jedi, and because of that individuality being entered into their system, they can't handle it, so they attack. And Luke has to kind of deal with it. Here he is using the Force technique called Electric Judgment, which is just light side Force lightning. Kind of a silly move if you ask me why they would invent that. But and around this time, Jacen Solo has a daughter named Alana with Tenel Ka Jo, who I think shows up in some of the books, but she's not super important. It's more important that he has a daughter that ends up being protected by Han and Leia from his eventual rampage. Yes?
When did the names start switching back to be more... less normal?
I don't know. The other thing is, during these next series of books, because after the New Jedi Order comes Legacy of the Force and then Fate of the Jedi, and both of those were series that were traded off between authors. So each of those had 3 authors, and it would be you write a book, then I write a book. So it's a little bit disjointed when the authors didn't agree on stuff. But I think they're still pretty good, especially if you can get, at least the ones I've read of them, especially if you can get the audiobooks, because Star Wars audiobooks tend to have sound effects and different noises for the different characters and stuff, which is pretty cool. Here's the Skywalker family tree. The Skywalker Solo family tree, because, they're connected. So up on the top left, we have Klieg Lars and Shmi, and Owen, and Beru, who adopted Luke, who is the son of Anakin and Padme, and you can see all the way down through there, Mara Jade, Ben Skywalker, there's a few generations. We'll meet Kate Skywalker later. And then on the other side, you've got the Solos, so you've got Jacen and Jaina and Anakin Solo. They have a bunch of kids, and then I guess they're connected into Clan Antilles. Jagged Fell will show up later. He's a fairly important character, as is his lineage. In 40 ABY, Jacen Solo finally falls to the dark side after experimenting and flirting with it for several years, and becomes the dark side apprentice to Lumaya, who is one of Darth Vader's other secret Sith apprentices. She convinces Jacen that, being a Sith isn't all that bad. There were some that actually, they weren't all that evil. She says, as an attempt to make him evil, which absolutely succeeds. He ends up killing Mara Jade, who is his aunt, and Luke ends up killing Lumaya, and he takes the name Darth Kaitis. He finds Centerpoint Station, which is one of the things made by the Celestials in the Maw, which is, that's the thing that's able to, manipulate gravity and stuff. So that's basically another super weapon that they have to destroy. Yes.
Is the Starforge still out there somewhere, or does that get destroyed in KOTOR?
It's destroyed at the end of KOTOR 1 when the Republic invades. So on the inside of it, you kill Darth Malak and then escape, and then they blow it up from the outside.
So this is the only, like, really old space station they kind of have left from that time period?
Yes.
Okay.
Although some would say that maybe the Starforge could rebuild itself. I think in the Darth Bane novels he travels there and he's like, that piece of metal is surprisingly clumpy. Like it's sticking back together. But nothing ever came of that, so it's probably gone for good. So in 41 ABY, Jacen Solo, having turned to the dark side, creates a new faction in like this is record time. This is a year, and he basically has recreated Palpatine's empire, and they're all serving in the Second Galactic Civil War. His girlfriend Tahiri kills Gilad Pellaeon and becomes his Sith apprentice, and Natasi Dala shows up again, basically on the good side this time, during the Second Galactic Civil War, which I put on the slide twice. His sister Jaina finally kills Jacen and puts an end to them, and Jagged Fel, who is a Imperial pilot, becomes the head of the Imperial Remnant, and Natasi Dala, who is an ex-Imperial herself, becomes the head of the Galactic Alliance. So even though they're all on the same side that the Rebels were now, most of the factions in the galaxy are controlled by ex-Imperials. And at this point, Ben Skywalker also becomes a full Jedi Knight. In 43 ABY, after realizing that, hey, the Jedi kind of can do whatever they want and don't face consequences, like one of them just fell to the dark side and caused another huge war, the government basically says, hey, Luke, you need to take responsibility for this. You are now exiled from the galaxy. He's like, that's fine. I need to figure out what happened with Jacen anyways, because he didn't realize like how he had fallen to the dark side. So he takes Ben with him, and they go on journeys. This is the Fate of the Jedi novel series. And then the other big threat in this is that random Jedi start having, they go insane. They'll be like, I don't recognize you. Like, you're my Jedi mom, but you're actually an imposter sent to attack me by some nefarious force, and they go crazy. Basically, these are people getting, like, Lovecraft jacked by Abeloth into going insane and recognizing each other and trying to bring her back. Because when Centerpoint Station was destroyed, it also weakened Sinkhole Station, which was not a super weapon, but was another construct made by the Celestials to imprison her, and now she is starting to become free. And so all these different factions, again, have to link up to stop her. The Lost Tribe of the Sith, which was all the way back to the Great Hyperspace War with Naga Sadow, they finally show up again because Abeloth's starting to infect them too, and they join forces with Luke and with the Galactic Alliance because we need to kill Abeloth again. I think they kill many, many different avatars of her in different spots and places, and they finally put her down, but it's implied that she'll be back again one day, and so Luke sends out a couple of Jedi to go on a quest to try and retrieve a mysterious dagger, which is a reference to the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars with that special dagger that would be able to kill her if she ever comes back. Yes.
Their spaceship is named Ship?
Yes. So Naga Sadow had a meditation sphere, and it's like a space thing, but apparently there's an AI in it, and at some point they named it Ship. I don't know if that was its name in a different language or if like somebody found it and were like, you're a ship, I'm going to call you Ship. But anyways, that's how they ended up realizing that Abeloth was messing with them. And she's like Queen Darkseid, like super powerful tentacle monster thing. At this point, Jagged Fel, that pilot and also husband of Jaina Solo, is kind of coalescing the Imperial Remnant around himself, and he kind of makes the Empire again in his own image. Still part of the Galactic Alliance at this point, but they start allowing aliens in, and he's a much nicer guy than the Empire was under, like, before him. Like, they're still militaristic, but they're not dark side anymore. And in fact, his successors implement this concept of the Imperial Knights, who are pictured in the middle. And they are light side Jedi, not affiliated with the Order, and their job is to act as bodyguards for the Emperor and like do regular Jedi stuff. But also their primary motive is, if the Emperor ever turns to the dark side, their job is to kill him, because they've realized that that is a big threat that's possible. And since he's having kids with Jaina Solo, who's connected into the Skywalker lineage, probably a lot of other kids are going to be able to use the Force. Any questions?
No. I just forgot that the Solo kid restarted the Empire, essentially.
Yeah.
So he owns the Remnant.
He owns the Remnant, and that's usually just called the Fel Empire to distinguish it from the previous one.
Gotcha.
And like during all the negotiation stuff, he's very insistent that his faction is still the Galactic Empire, even though everyone else calls it the Imperial Remnant, and it makes him feel like a little man. Yeah.
So is this Empire like kind of good guys then?
Yeah, they're kind of good guys.
They don't have like slavery or anything like that?
Right. It's like these are planets that were part of the Empire and they still have a lot of the bureaucracy, but they're okay with being not evil.
Cool.
And they're part of the Galactic Alliance at this point too. Like it's just like this is the stable part of the government, I guess. They're the good guy Imperials.
Do they also have an order called Order 65 for that destroy the Emperor?
I don't think so. I think, those orders were only for the Grand Army of the Republic, but the clones made on Kamino, so I don't think so. But, yeah, I mean, it's a big deal that they started allowing, and, like, the Stormtroopers were not drafted, like, they were volunteers and stuff, but alien Stormtroopers. See how progressive he is. So now we have another big time skip because this is the end of the Fate of the Jedi series and the tie-in with the Lost Tribe of the Sith novel, and now we enter the Legacy comics. So if you remember, Asherad Het was that Jedi who survived Order 66 and joined the Tusken Raiders Sand People. And he's been biding his time this whole time, slowly turning evil and like finding Sith holocrons, and he reemerges himself as Darth Krayt, named after the Krayt Dragons of Tatooine, and he has this cool armor. And he formed a new order called the One Sith. So they're not part of the Darth Bane lineage. Even though there's multiple of them, they're only one Sith because he's the big boss and they are his henchmen, which is not a new arrangement, but he acts like it's a new arrangement.
How is he still alive?
I think he spent several decades in stasis, but also I think he's used the dark side of the Force to extend his life.
You can just do that?
I guess so. It's like Sith sorcery can do anything if you're a comic book writer.
What happens to Luke?
So that's the thing is, like, Luke is alive at the end of this, and he dies at some point. He's not still around for this one. You see him as a Force ghost in this one, but I don't think, like, the death of Luke has ever been actually covered. Or, like, seen, quote-unquote, on screen. So the good guy Yuuzhan Vong at this point are trying to terraform Ossus, which is one of the planets that they really devastated. But these guys infiltrate the planet and sabotage it to start up tensions in the galaxy again. And Rowan Fel, who's the current emperor of the Fel Empire, secedes from the alliance and basically says, we're our own thing, and you guys have been messing up politics for too long. Let's have another war between the Empire and the New Republic. And that goes on for a while, but it's called the Sith Imperial War because Darth Krayt infiltrates him and takes over his empire from within. So then it does become a bad guy empire. But that's because the rightful ruler was deposed, and he's killing all the Imperial Knights there. And he sits on the throne in Coruscant. And so this is called the Second Imperial Civil War, not to be confused with the Second Galactic Civil War. And it's the Imperial Civil War because he only managed to kill a body double of Rowan Fel. The real Rowan Fel escaped, and so there's still people loyal to him, so there's infighting within the Empire. And this is also the era when the Twin-Tail Starfighter is a thing that exists. And I think the TIE variant in this era is looks more like an eyeball with like the wings are kind of like this as opposed to this. If you've seen a picture, you know what I mean, but it's like a ball with like, it's kind of like a golden snitch. And the hero of this era is Cade Skywalker, the death stick addicted great grandson of Luke. Luke always shows up as a Force ghost to like tell him to stop doing drugs and be a Jedi, which just makes him do more drugs because then he doesn't see the ghost anymore. But he eventually convinces him to go on a bunch of Jedi adventures and fight off, these guys, Darth Talon, and those other guys, Darth Krayt. Cade finally encounters Celeste Morn, the girl with that thing around her neck again, and he's powerful enough in the Force to actually destroy the talisman and kill her, which finally puts an end to the Rakghoul plague once and for all. And also the spirit of Karnus Moor, who's been a Sith ghost for a very long time now. In 138 ABY, after coming back to life in various forms and ways, Darth Krayt, who's not wearing armor there, is finally killed for the final time after a joint effort by all of the different factions in the galaxy. He dies for the final time. Rowan Fel finally falls to the dark side after all this happens, and his Imperial Knights do their job and kill him, so that he does remain a good guy emperor. And at this point, the galaxy is run as a triumvirate through three different groups. You've got the Galactic Alliance with Admiral Gar Stasi, this girl, Marasiah Fel, who's, I don't remember if it's the sister or the daughter of Rowan Fel, or maybe cousin, but like she's related to them and also can use the Force. And then the Jedi are their own faction at this point because the Republic doesn't really like them anymore, and that's Kukruk. And the last event known in Star Wars Legends timeline is in 140 ABY. Anya Solo stops a Sith insurgency that was started, I think him was behind it. I think he survived and kept trying to start trouble, but Anya Solo manages to end it. So now we can start talking about some more out-of-universe stuff, because we have reached the end of the Legends timeline. What happened to Battlefront 3? It was cancelled in 2008, but different story beats and aspects of it that were planned did make its way into other games. So one of the things that was in the early pre-alpha builds was the idea that you could get in a ship and fly and fight in space, and then also like fly right down to like the land and do stuff there. And that ended up being into Elite Squadron on the PSP and on the DS, although the DS there were different levels. It's not like you could actually fly back and forth.
I was going to say, if you still have, there's like a, I don't remember what it's called, there's like a special thing that you can go around to get on back on the PSP market. They do have a demo for that game where you could do all that stuff or whatever on the market.
Yeah. It makes total sense that the PSP version would actually have that cool feature.
Are they still making Legend stuff even though Disney owns them?
So they made a continuation of the old-ass Marvel comics a while back, like a new issue, but that was kind of like a one-time thing. The only Legends thing that's still in active development is the Old Republic MMO. That's in the Legends continuity, and they're still getting expansions to it until, there's...
Doesn't make any money anymore.
Yeah, until it finally dies to RuneScape or whatever. And then I think Renegade Squadron also got some of the different... sort of story beats maybe and some of the technology, but I think Elite Squadron was where most of it came from. Sometimes you'll see videos that claim to be from Battlefront 3, but you can see two Jedi fighting that are like these clone guys, because this was the story about two clones of Jedi who fought as clones, and one of them fell to the dark side and the other one was a Jedi. And you see those two fighting in some of those trailers, and that's clear that if it is pre-alpha, if anything is pre-alpha of Elite Squadron, I don't believe that story was ever intended for Battlefront 3, but maybe it was. It's not super clear because the company that was working on it went under or whatever, so it's a very murky story as to what actually happened with it. And finally, with video games, because those are where you get the story most easily injected because you can absorb it from the game itself, here's the ones that are still in development. Star Wars Hunters is a game by Zynga. If you remember them, I think they made Farmville, so probably don't hold your breath for that one. The KOTOR remake was supposedly canceled, but recently there was like a shareholder document. It is still being made, but like not a lot of attention is being to it, so I don't know if maybe they're just like pretending it's not canceled.
I did hear that they recently said that they aren't going to be they were originally going to make the restored content mod into a DLC, and they've canceled that now.
Okay, so restored content mod was for KOTOR 2.
Yes. Oh, sorry, KOTOR 2 remake. Yeah.
Oh, were they going to do that as well?
I thought they were.
Okay, that was news to me. Because the trailer only showed Revan, but actually it's worth bringing that up. So Obsidian, who are the developers of KOTOR 2, had this whole big plan for a lot of the story stuff, and Lucasfilm came in and said, you need to get the game up by Christmas. So what they actually did was they took all of their like scripts and a lot of like assets that they had worked on but couldn't fully implement, and they just hid them in the code. So that when the PC version came out, hackers would be able to find it and finish the game and actually mod it back in, which is exactly what happened, which is very cool.
What happened to Revan?
As far as the KOTOR storyline is, he went off to fight this shadowy threat and was probably successful. As far as the MMO, there's like 3 expansions all about what happens with him. So there's a whole ton of story stuff. Like he gets captured and then he dies and then he comes back, and then his light side and dark side have split off and become 2 different guys that go to war with each other. There's a whole bunch of stuff. But I think in the end he's eventually, like, he doesn't kill the Sith Emperor because he keeps coming back. So at least the unsatisfying thing about the MMO is that he never sees his wife and child again after he leaves the galaxy.
Oh.
But I like to think in the original idea of the continuity, he cleaned things up a lot faster and was able to come home. Star Wars Eclipse, the David Cage one, there's been some controversy about that. It's not been officially canceled, but we can probably count on it not being for a while because of the controversy. We know Respawn Entertainment is making an FPS. Whether that's going to be another Battlefront or not, I think DICE still has the Battlefront thing, so this may be something different. There's a strategy game, and it's by a studio, I didn't write the name, but it's made out of devs that left the team that worked on XCOM, so that could be pretty cool. There's a Ubisoft open world game, and there's Skydance New Media Action Adventure, which is not connected into the Jedi whatever series, so probably they're not working on it as much, because they're pretty heavily doing the Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor stuff. And, well, we'll we'll see. We'll see if there's a third Jedi game, because apparently Jedi Survivor has had some very rocky reviews. Maybe if they get a patch out that fixes all of the performance issues, because I hear it's a great game when it works, but most of the time it doesn't work. So we'll see. And I think that is the end of the slide. Does anyone have any further questions? Do you know all of Star Wars now?
Most of it.
I don't know the canon stuff, but
Well,
I know the good stuff. So
What happened to Kyle Katarn?
I don't think his death is ever detailed anywhere. He definitely survived through the Yuuzhan Vong War, because there's a comic book, a non-canon comic book called Star Wars Tales. It was never canon, but it shows him, and it doesn't have anything super weird. So the way Star Wars Tales works is they're kind of like what-if stories, and some of them are really weird. Like if you've heard about Skippy, the Jedi droid, he's from one of those. But there's also much more grounded ones that presumably could have happened. And there's one where he's fighting the Yuuzhan Vong, he gets imprisoned and he fights his way out. I don't think he has a canon death anywhere, though. He's just working as one of Luke's Jedi instructors.
His gopher.
He's his gopher. Yes.
Do you know if the it came out a long time ago, the Bounty Hunter Star Wars game is anywhere near canon or whatever?
Yeah, so Star Wars 1313 is...
No, not that one.
No?
There's an
There's a
older
different
one
one?
that was called Bounty Hunter that came out for GameCube and stuff way back.
Yeah,
in the day.
when you replay as Jango Fett.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one was in the Legends canon. It's not in the new canon. I don't think much of the stuff he does in that is incredibly important, but I think that's maybe where he meets Zam Wesell and some of the other characters. He interferes with them.
So, where do the short stories from the Tales from the Cantina and the Tales of Bounty Hunter and all that stuff, did those fit into canon very cleanly? That had Dengar and IG-88 and all those characters, their backstories in there?
Yeah, so the backstories, including some of the weird stuff about IG-88, is still canon. I didn't bring it up, but
Okay.
one of the things that happens immediately prior to the Death Star 2 being blown up by Lando is that IG-88 hacks it and takes over the entire battle station for his own nefarious plans.
he essentially wanted to make a Terminator droid revolution across the entire galaxy.
But he picked a star state. He picked a battle station that was currently under attack.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that all of that stuff does fit in. I didn't include a lot of it, but yeah, all the Dengar stuff, all the Shadows of the Empire, that stuff that takes place before Episode 5, that all fits into this.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. You've been a wonderful audience.
Thank you.
Join with us, and you're now Jedi Knights.
Yeah!